Arizona has to offer. Find your purpose at GCU.
Okay. Hear that. Well, I can see you.
Hello, Harrison.
Hello.
God damn. Harrison, welcome. We're having some boomer moments with the internet today, everybody. But welcome. If you're here, if you're watching this, at whatever time you're watching this, hello. We're here. Streamlabs was
we seem to have. Oh, I see. I'm watching the stream as we're doing it. So
that's. I was muted. I muted myself. That's.
Yeah, because there's one guy here who says no audio. Just saying that. Anyway.
Harrison, I'm not very good at this.
Okay.
I'll admit. So I can't actually. Okay, great. There we go. Cooking with Sal. Hello, Sal. Welcome. Anyhow, Harrison, welcome. So, absolutely. Initial episode of WRH Live. I had so many thoughts about how I wanted to intro this, but now I'm, of course, in the moment, just drawing a blank. But I guess we're here to talk about your books, of course.
Thank you for stroking my narcissism.
and just, I guess, just by way of intro, I would say that I want to talk about like the Latin word historia and what that actually means. Like it means history, but also it means just story. Like it referred back then to fiction and to history. Like a lot of fiction obviously includes some history, and like that's also true of the inverse. Like a lot of history includes some fiction, and I don't mean in like the fake news sense. Like particularly in ancient history, like you have to like create models, and professional historians will say, well, we don't know, but this is how it must have been because of X, Y, and Z. Like we don't have the evidence for it, but they're essentially creating a narrative that like you know, kind of pieces something together logically, if that makes sense. So my own interests, I would say, cover that broad word of historia, both fiction and history. And that's essentially why I created this channel. It's the kind of stuff I want to talk about.
Yeah,
so
it's a very interesting topic to get into, like history and whatnot.
Absolutely.
I find that history is one of the greatest unfolding stories in history.
That's well said, and it's, you know, that's not why we're here today, but we could go on and on about, you know, like,
it depends on what tangent we go on, I guess.
Indeed, we don't know exactly how this is going to go. You know, it's going to be part, you know, inside the actor's studio with James Lipton, and part, you know, just a conversation between buds, because that's exactly what it is. But in any case, yes, we are here to talk about your Dragon King trilogy. Is it actually called the Dragon King trilogy? Is that?
Well, I prefer to. Well, the name I prefer to give to the universe that I've been creating ever since I've been 18 years old, and I am now 25.
Right.
I prefer to call it the Draco Rex universe, or the Draco Rex sagas.
Okay, and that's obviously a very. I mean, it's a character in book 1, but I don't know yet if it's a character later. But
that's the overarching I guess plot device for the whole series. This book, these 3 books you have, they're only the first 3. And actually, funny story, I had to cut the intended plot line for book 3 in half. So book 4 is going to end where book 3 should have ended, because it was just getting too long at that point. Book 3 was 400. Finally finished editing it. It's 416 pages long.
Yeah, it was by far the longest of the 3. I definitely noticed that.
Yeah, well, basically, how do I describe this? In writing book 3, in writing book 1, I just kind of wrote where the story took me, and then for book 2, I had a more or less general idea of what was going to happen. I wrote it, and then I went back and added a whole bunch of stuff, like that whole scene in the tunnels with the rat monsters. That was a completely new edition, the second edition, I should say. And whereas book 3, I knew what was going to happen, but then I just kind of let the story go where it went off.
Sure.
Like, yeah, I don't know. How do I best describe my madness for creating these things?
Well, I do want to get into process
Okay.
in a minute. I'm not going to keep like a heavy hand on the order we go through things, but I want to get to process in a second. So let's just belay that for just 1 second. But
laying that order, Captain.
The story, it's about a young elf child named Myra.
Allison Greenleaf, yes.
Trying to set right a horrific historical wrong. Is that a fair description of the just broad strokes of the story?
I would say yes. That is an accurate generalization of the story, but it's also I just like it's a I want to go back. Where was I going with this?
That's
I too had like grand ideas of how I was going to do this stream. And now I'm also drawing a blank. It's
right.
It's like when you're asked like, "What's your favorite book?" and the second you ask that, you forget every book you've ever.
Yeah, I have to choose one. It's kind of why part of why I find live streaming appealing is because you don't have that safety net where you can't go back and edit.
Yeah, and you just gotta go plow ahead.
Yeah, stumble over it, screw it, keep going. It's off to Pluto.
Yeah. So
you were saying how that's kind of an oversimplification.
Yeah, well, it's not just about like the character Myra setting the historical wrong. There's also a lot of there's also going to be a lot of like character stuff going on, like just so that everyone is on equal footing who watches the stream. I'm going to give a little plot synopsis.
Yeah, fair enough.
So the story takes place in a different world to ours. I haven't figured out a name for it yet. It's not like Westeros or Middle Earth or or whatever that planet with the giant blue Smurf people was from. You know what I'm talking about.
Avatar. I don't remember the world, but yeah, Avatar. Yeah.
I haven't figured out a whole name for that. Like Draco Rex is like just the name of the story.
Right.
The story takes the first book takes place in the island country called the Agricolestes, which translated from Latin means heavenly field, or at least that's what Google Translate tells me. Take it that way you will. And Myra is she lives with her legal guardian, 18-year-old Jason Spencer Argonaut, and who himself lives with his two cousins, his cousin Beatrice, who is the same age, and his cousin Daniel, who is the same age as Myra. Now they live a nice, peaceful, quiet existence. But a year before the story begins, Myra's family disappeared off the face of the earth. Like she went out to a bonfire party with her friends one night, and she comes back, and her house was ransacked. Her family's missing, and yeah, so she has been made a ward of Jason Spencer Argonaut,
who himself is essentially a child, right? He's like 18, something like that.
Well, actually,
young man, we'll say.
Yeah, he's an interesting point. In the Agricolestes, you know how you know in real life you are considered an adult when you hit 18,
right?
Or 19 or whatever it might be. I've noticed people are kind of trying to push it back because they don't want to give up the childhood. And
yes.
Whereas in the Agricolestes, you are a man the second you turn 15.
Okay, so it's literally like ancient Rome. That was their coming of age. Yeah.
Yeah, and actually, and a little backstory for our audience. 3 years before the events of the main story. Wait a second. Did I say Myra's family disappeared 3 years or 1 year before the events of the main story?
Well, I think you said 3.
My mistake. 1 year before the events of the main story, Myra's family disappeared. But 3 years before that, the Agricolestes was attacked and was attacked by the Sulian Empire, and they thought the Sulians thought it was going to be a walk in the park because, well, pretty much it was like Operation Barbarossa, like with the Germans versus the Russians. However, the Sulians got their rear ends handed to them, and Jason is a veteran of that 7-month-long war. And of all of his classmates, he alone was the only one to survive out of a class of like 30. And he saw a number of them die. So he's a little bit messed up in the head. Like he has nightmares about it.
Grow up fast, essentially.
Yeah, he was either grow up fast or die young.
Right.
And so Myra has been living with Jason, and she's known Jason pretty much her entire life, ever since her family got off the boat from wherever it was they came from. I won't spoil where they came from because that's a big plot point later on in the story arc. But so she's known Jason her entire life, and at the beginning of the story, she's about to turn 12 years old, and she is asked by her tutor, Professor Julius Goatman, to help him study flocks of dragons that migrate to the Agricolestes year after year to lay their eggs and have their chicks and whelplings. And it is there that we are introduced to arguably the two most powerful characters in the story in the first book, Amaron and his twin sister Twizel. And Twizel's whelpling, who I just put in there.
Which is a great relationship, by the way. That's a lot of fun. Their scenes together are a lot of fun.
Thanks. And so generally for most of the book, it's Myra. For most of book one, it was Myra. It was Mr. Goatman telling Myra stories about the Dragon King and her observing Amaron and Twizel from a distance. Because in my world, dragons are roughly around the same size and are as dangerous as a Tyrannosaurus Rex. Actually, more dangerous than a Tyrannosaurus Rex because they don't just breathe fire. There's obviously flames involved, but there's also they also shoot this sticky, flammable substance where the second it collides on you, there's no getting it off. It's like napalm that way. And also they are darn near bulletproof. The only way for certain you are going to go up against a dragon and win is if you're in a tiger tank. And even then,
Which that's I definitely want to get into that mixture of different elements, which is extremely interesting, and I feel kind of unique in the fantasy scene. But
yeah, I'm not sure how you would classify my stories. Yeah. So anyway, the end of the book, Myra finds out that that there was a prophecy made by the Dragon King when he was betrayed by the king of Arthuria, Muriband, and who gave himself over to the Great Deceiver, pretty much my world's version of the Dark Lord. Actually, I based him off Satan mostly, like the devil. And so right before Draco Rex vanished from history, he made a prophecy saying that 2 children would arise to find and waken him, and that these children would be given the most amount of magic that any person has ever had in this world. And book 1 ends with the Sulians reinvading the Agrogalestes, conquering it, and Myra, Jason's 2 cousins, Beatrice and Daniel, and the 3 dragons, Amaron, Twizel, and the Whelpling, flying north to go find Myra's helper, the he and she who were foretold. Myra's the she, they have to go find the he. And book 2 begins with them going basically into the Sulian capital, Empire City, and let's just say it doesn't go over overly well with them. Their introduction was what's the polite word for completely up crap creek without a paddle? What was that? Oh.
It's my desktop.
Okay.
Dell being Dell.
Be quiet, Dell. We're talking here.
Yeah.
So in book 2, the book begins with them flying into Empire City, and they're like towering skyscrapers and just thick black smoke and fog all over the place. Think of it like Beijing on a very cloudy day. Like, have you seen footage of the Beijing smoke?
I got a lot of like a Pyongyang vibe from Empire City. And
think that, but the smoke is black. Like, I didn't write this in the story, but I'm going to reference it later on in the books. But Empire City, one of its like nicknames is the City of Eternal Night, because there's no sunlight. The only light there is like the street lights, and also the fires from all the factories that are constantly churning out new weapons and vehicles for the Sulian Empire. So they fly into Empire City on the Dragonbacks, and they get attacked by 2 rocket-powered aircraft that shoot them down.
They were essentially drones, right? Like, they weren't piloted?
Oh, they were piloted, actually.
They were piloted. Okay. Yeah, I missed that.
Well, think of it like, I can't remember now, which I based these Dragon Catchers off of a real rocket plane that served the German army, not the German army, German Air Luftwaffe during the Second World War. I can't remember which classification it was. It was not the 262, definitely not that one. It was the I can't remember what it's called now. Narado? No. Anyway, that's beside the point. So anyway, they get shot down. They all get scattered. Myra is located by the local resistance, the underground resistance movement of Empire City. She is brought to Jason, who is all shot to hell because he took a direct blast from a 12 millimeter cannon shell. Royally messed up his leg. Amaron has had the fleshy membranes between his wings, like the webbing between his wing fingers, like completely shredded, so he can't fly anymore. And no one knows where Twizel, the Whelpling, and Beatrice and Daniel have gone. As far as they know, they might be dead. And it's here in Empire City that Myra is taught by Mr. Goatman's older brother, Professor Goatman, that she is taught by him how to use her magic properly, because he only just figured out how to like levitate things, and he pretty much gives her like a crash college course in how to use it properly and how to not to get herself killed by this stuff, by using this stuff.
And he seems abundantly aware of their short time schedule as well, given their situation.
Yeah, because they're constantly they only move like safe. They move originally Myra and Jason they were in different safe houses, but directly across the street from one another. So she would go visit him when he was wounded. But then Professor Goatman had her transferred to another safe house further away because what was it he said? It's not very good to have all your eggs in one basket. If the Sulians catch you, they'll catch Jason, and vice versa. However, the safe house the new safe house she's in gets raided. She is betrayed by a member of the underground who I tried to make as sleazy and slimy as possible. Did I get
you succeeded. Yes.
I hope not too over the top. I mean, there's a certain level of over the topness, but not quite. Does that make any sense to you?
If it's the character I'm thinking of, the
doormat.
Yes.
The doorman, yeah.
Yes, it felt very, very much like a Miyazaki villain from like Spirited Away or something. If that makes any sense, like
that's a genius, by the way, Miyazaki.
We'll get into that, but yeah, go ahead and carry on with your summary.
Yeah, so Myra is forced to watch one of the underground members. She watches the doorman get betrayed by the Sulians, and he's shot in the face by a gold bullet. The Sulians said they'd pay this doorman in gold. They didn't say it was going to be in the form of a bullet to the face, but oh well.
That was a great scene, by the way. The golden bullet. Yeah, that was fantastic.
Yeah, and then she watches from the shadows as the person who was looking after her in the safe house just basically says, "I'm not telling you where she's gone. I don't know where she's gone. Kill me. I don't care." And then she runs off deeper into the city, gets hopelessly lost because basically she has lived her entire life out in the Agroblastes, which is basically as flat as a pancake. There's no trees. You can see literally for as far as your eyes can see. And since Myra's an elf, she can see a lot further than a person can. And in Empire City, it's just basically like it's basically a maze to her. She can't find it. And while she's wandering around Empire City, she nearly gets captured again. She nearly gets captured by a Sulian soldier. But she is saved by two current events. One is at the moment she is confronted by this Sulian soldier. The central command tower in Empire City, pretty much like the Sulians HQ, suddenly explodes. Like it wasn't enough to blow it completely apart, but a big chunk of it is now a burning wreck. And that catches the Sulian soldier off guard. The second is that she's saved by this mysterious boy who has magic, and he forces the Sulian to just basically he mind tricks them. You know that scene from Star Wars with Obi-Wan, like, you don't need to see our identity.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, I was drawn heavily on that scene. And so he basically grabs her, runs off. They run for as far as they can. They stop after they are well and truly out of the soldier's sight, and he basically says, "You stupid idiot! You should have just kept running. Don't stop. You're like a deer in the headlights." And this boy takes her on a little journey through Empire City to where he lives, the Underhaven, where he and his mother and several dozen other orphan children lived, and they live there. They all have magic except for Az's. She doesn't have magic.
I do want to talk more about the Underhaven later, but I'll just say now that gave me a very like Lost Boys of Peter Pan sort of vibe, if that makes sense.
Well, I've seen Peter Pan. I've never seen Lost Boys. Is that the one with the vampires?
Oh no, I mean that Peter Pan's crew, like he called them the Lost Boys, kind of thing.
All right. I haven't a brain fart moment.
Yeah, no, it's not the Kiefer Sutherland vampire movie. No, it didn't give me that vibe at all. No.
I've never seen it. I don't have no intention of seeing it.
It's very nostalgic to people of my generation. I'll say that. But
yes, so they go to this abandoned subway station that they call the Underhaven, and it is there that Myra learns that the boy's name is Asa. And the reason that they're all hiding there is because the Sulian Empire has deemed that if anyone is born with magic, they are to kill them on sight. There's sort of they view magic as sort of like a degenerate disease. Like no one should have this power, so to speak.
The mutants and X-Men ish.
Well, not really. Not really. Think more like Nazis and Jews or Slavs.
Yeah,
Gypsy.
sure.
And I based the Sulians heavily off the Nazis, and also Rome. Also, like, what happened? What if the Roman Empire kind of survived and turned into them?
You're predicting all my future material here, but
okay. So yeah, what's up? So Myra goes down to the other heaven, where lo and behold, she finds that Jason's two cousins, Beatrice and Daniel, have also found their way to the Underhaven. And since Beatrice is a nurse, she's been helping Mrs. Draconis look after the kids there. And then when Jason finds out that the safe house that Myra was stationed in gets raided, he tries to get up and just go find her, even though he is shot all to pieces. He's just going to try and muscle through it. But then Mr. Goban's like, no, you're staying here until you are completely healed up, and then we will go try and find her. And you get some character development between Jason and Amaron. At the end of the book, at the end of the first book, when you find out that the dragons can talk, he tells Myra and Jason to their faces that he does not like anything that goes on two legs. Even that's kind of ironic because actually dragons are bipedal in this world.
Yeah, that moment of like understanding between the two of them, how they're like both kind of like children of war. That was pretty well done. Where they sort of like,
well, Jason reminisces to Amaron about how his parents were killed during the first Sulian invasion of the about how they had driven up to the front line to see him after he had sort of like had a nervous breakdown after the last of his friends got killed, and then they were driving.
I wouldn't say they become friends necessarily, but like they get to like a grudging place where they can like tolerate each other, maybe.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, but then Jason tells Amaron about how his parents were killed by by the local town drunk, who, as it turned out, was a Stulian spy. Like, he described his like the back seat of the drunk's car was laden with documents that would have given the Sulians an advantage, and also in the trunk there was enough Sulian gold coinage to keep him in booze from here to eternity. And he just explodes at that point because pretty much I believe like Jason felt like his happy-go-lucky childhood life ended the day the Sulians invaded.
Sure.
Yeah, and then Amaron describes to Jason about how he lost his parents. About how he describes remembering like these dark clouds coming over the nesting area, and all of a sudden they started dropping these strange things that basically he was describing zeppelins and dropping incendiary bombs on his flock.
Right.
Hit by one of these things, and she bursting into flame, trying desperately to put the fire out. But since it was like a petrol base, she couldn't put it out, and she just laid down and died. Whereas he described his father getting hit in the head with a dud bomb, but it hitting his brain and killing him instantly. And he described how he and his twin sister basically huddled under his corpse and watched their entire world burn to cinders.
The aspect of like multiple sentient races like sort of navigating this like technological war environment, that was really, really interesting to me. Like
that is interesting. Actually, you know what? I don't know if you if I did a good job describing it at the end of the second book, but when Amaron and Twizel jump in at the end of the second book and save Myra, Jason, and their little group from almost getting killed by the Sulians, and them talking in like normal human talk, like they were like, "Whoa, these guys can actually speak," because
right. You go from I think they're animals to
not really. Like that. There's a scene in the first book where Myra is looking back, is observing Amaron, Twizel, and their whelpling playing on the prairies of the Agrolestes. She hears this rumbling in the distance. It was at the time Jason and the militia were being called up to basically perform a military exercise.
Sure.
Incidentally, that's the reason the Sulians gave to invading the Agrolestes, basically saying, Oh, they were conducting these overly aggressive acts up on our border, so we basically came in and just stopped them. Even though the military exercises were nowhere near the borders, but that's beside the point. Basically, Myra was observing the dragon. She looked back when she heard this rumbling in the distance of the militia exercise. She turns around and there he is, Amaron, big as life, just towering over her, looking her straight in the eye, and basically picking through her mind. Because there's one thing you never ever do, Wild Dragon. It's look him directly in the eye and hold his gaze, because, well, you can get caught under a dragon spell.
Right. I mean, but just on the animal thing, like I've heard stories about people who like went whale watching and got too close, and like the whale looked at them and they had this like quasi-religious experience where like, whoa, that is not an animal. Like that thing like has some intelligence beyond me. You know what I mean? And like people have had those experiences with like dolphins. Like, so it's, I don't know, that like the distance between animal and sentient is maybe it's more spectrum than like bright line, I guess.
Yeah, I wouldn't say like real life animals are self-aware. You know, there's a line from the movie The Life of Pi where the character Pi is talking with his dad. And his dad is, as he got too close to the tiger cage, and he said, Peter, like the tiger. Peter has a Richard Parker. That's the name. Richard Parker has a soul, and his dad said, "No, that's your soul reflecting off his eyes."
Yeah.
That's kind of my opinion. Like, oh, animals are sentient. And I felt the same way when I looked into my late dog's eyes.
Sure. Sure.
Anyway.
Yes. Well, we're a half hour in. Get your summary going, and we'll move on to some more specific stuff.
Okay, so basically, Myra and Azig and the rest of the children of the Unnamed had to come up from the tunnel every now and then to raid these what are called lunch boxes. They're basically like a steel box bolted onto like street corners for Cerulean guards, just to basically like, oh, I'm standing here, I've been standing here for hours, I'm hungry, oh, there's my lunch box, it's already packed with sandwiches and cold cuts or whatever. So they raid those as often as they can. So not all of them are so they have to raid a number of them, like build up a stockpile.
Right.
But then while they're doing that, Myra and Asa see this giant column of tanks rumbling towards them, and they're forced to take cover in another tunnel. And they go into this tunnel, and they get lost. And it is here in this tunnel that they encounter giant rat men, which Asa doesn't believe in until Myra points out, like, there's a giant, there are bones, and also like cave painting. And they continue on, and they find the dragoness Twizel and her whelpling, hopelessly, like, they're horribly wounded from the attack with the dragon catchers. Myra uses her magic to heal the whelp completely, and the whelpling to fall head over heels in love with her. It's only a few months this time. And,
the whelpling's behavior is like part small child, part dog in some ways. You know what I mean? It's like, it's
I tried to make him as cute as possible, but also he's quite dangerous because he is a dragon. Think of it like a velociraptor, be like a pet velociraptor. Like,
sure,
he's fine, but when he gets angry, he's got those claws, and not to mention the
absolutely, or even like a dog that is like mentally a puppy but physically like gigantic, like a pit bull, like doesn't know its own strength kind of thing, you know.
Actually, my one friend, she got a Great Dane a while ago. He's 10 months old, but he's still a puppy.
Yeah,
and that thing is bigger than I am. And one time he jumped on top of me. I was like, fortunately, I was standing right in front of a chair, and he knocked me down.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah.
Similar thing, I think.
Yeah. So Myra and Asa, Twizel, and the whelpling, they creep through these tunnels, but then they find, oh no, we have just stumbled into the bed chamber of the giant rat queen mother, and they try to quietly creep through, but then they come across the guard. his back, like a rat guard. His back is turned to them. And before anyone knows what's happening, Azza has slipped off Twizel's back. They're riding the dragon at this point. Azza slips off Twizel's back, creeps up behind him, pulls out a pocket knife, and shanks him right in the neck. And then he creeps back, and he climbs back up on Twizel's back, and they continue on with Myra just in utter horror because Azza's not that much older than her. Actually, they're the same age, but they don't quite know that they don't know that they share the same birthday yet in the story.
Aha! Spoiler.
Yeah. Oops. Sorry. Try to keep this as spoiler-free as possible. So Myra's basically horrified because like that was a living person. That was a living being. What if that had been like a human being? And Azza's like, what of it? And it's then that Myra realized Azza has killed people. And then Azza basically, what are you looking at me like that for? I've had to do this. Like, you know those other kids at the Underhaven? They've done more than me. Like one character, Alex, he's knifed like 25. Like the girl Chloe, very sullen one, she's knifed at least 75.
It's a very stark illustration of their different upbringings, I guess. You know, if you or I had been born in Iraq in 1999, what would we be doing right now? You know what I mean? Like that was what Asa gave me thoughts of.
Yeah. What would I be doing instead of Canadian? Okay, enough yank ribbing right there. Anyway, so they continue on, and all of a sudden, the crap hits the fan because all of a sudden the rat men know that they're there. A giant chase scene ensues. Twizel manages to kill Queen Mother and also her two giant bastard sons, who are also her husbands. Don't think about it too much. And yet they manage to get away from there, collapse the tunnel behind them, and they find out, lo and behold, the tunnel we are in is actually the tunnel that leads to the Underhaven. We can't get there because there's a giant mound of like debris cluttering the way, which Twizel says, leaves that to me, cracks her knuckles, digs through. They are reunited with the children of the Underhaven. And then, later on, oh no, it turns out that the Sulians have discovered that the Underhaven exists, and they're planning on raiding it soon. And then, Twizel, Mrs. Draconis, Azza's mom, says, okay, we are going to leave the Underhaven. Twizel's going to dig out the other tunnel that leads out of here, and hopefully we will come to the tunnel. We'll get on a train that gets out of Empire City, and we'll figure it out there. Simultaneously, Jason and Amaron are finding out that they are also moving because the underground is about to be betrayed again by a turncoat. So they're packing up and leaving. And they are also heading to the main rail hub in Empire City to get on a train and get out of there. But they're dressed up as Sulian secret police. Think like Gestapo, like fedora, like black trench leather coats, and all that.
That scene was wonderful too when they're sneaking with the dragon through like a city, and they put the dragon on the back of a train car. I'm like, what?
Well, before they get to the train car, Amaron has to be draped with like this piece of canvas that's completely black. And since Empire City, like if they came across a patrol, he just slide down a dark corner and pray to high heaven that no one notices that shadow over there looks particularly solid.
That's hefty.
So long story short, both groups end up running into each other at the rail hub, which incidentally I described it as looking like a palace because the current emperor, Sablanka the 26th, which actually incidentally the way I came up with the name Sablanka is because I was trying to come up with a name, and I was looking around in my room and I saw this old cassette tape I have. Yes, I do have a VHS machine. It still works. I still use it. I'm that old. And
we're just boomers.
Yeah. And I looked over and I saw Casablanca, and I thought, Casablanca. Remove the first. Sablanca. Okay, I'll use that name.
All fantasy names are either from history or like have that like origin story. You know what I mean? You just grab some random word like.
Backwards. or usual words spelled backwards. Like my name Harrison spelled backwards spells Nosara, which I think sounds like a pretty good name. I might end up using.
That's an outstanding fantasy name, actually.
What would your name be spelled backwards? Out of curiosity.
Nivek, I guess.
Not a bad name.
That's
anyway.
Definitely a villain.
Yeah. No, I don't know. Sounds like a. You know what? I just might end up coming up with a story of the adventures of Nosara and Nivek. Anyway, so the current emperor, Sablenka the 26th, he loves railways. Like commanded, like all the train stations on the home Sulian Isles must be as palace-like as possible. Myra and Jason run into each other with their two groups. They unthinkingly shout each other's real names. Unfortunately, there's also happens to be at least a battalion's worth of Sulian legionaries and secret police there. A fight ensues.
Yeah, and by the way, that was a great kid moment too. Like when they shout each other's real names. Like I feel like internet dorks would be like, "Oh, that's like a dumb like plot device," but it's like they're kids. Like why wouldn't they? You know what I mean? Like
Myra is a kid, and Jason had no idea whether she was alive or dead at this point.
Right.
And overwhelmed, like, Myra, there you are. It's like, oh, shoot, I should have kept my mouth shut. And basically, the crap hits the fan because all, like not only are the underground resistance members attacked, but also the kids from the Underhaven, because basically the Sulians see through both disguises because the children of the Underhavens, they were basically bluffing their way into the station, saying, oh, we're on a field trip to go out somewhere. So fight ensues. They manage to get out of there after completely wrecking the Royal Rail Hub. But as they get away, they are confronted by the Sulian lieutenant who killed Myra's underground guardian back a few chapters earlier, and he's got Jason dead to rights. But he doesn't pull the trigger. He hesitates. Like Jason see that the man is like, his eyes are practically starting out of his head, and he says like, "You can't be here. It can't be you." And then Jason like shoots him in the chest, but he doesn't die because he's got a bulletproof vest on. They are separated from a collapsing, burning ceiling beam. They get out, and in order to cause as much chaos for both the children of the Underhaven and the underground resistance fighters to get out of there, Jason jumps on Amaron's back and they attack the central tower directly. And basically all hell breaks out because this is the first time that this central tower has been attacked. And Jason can tell that because this central tower is like bristling with like machine guns, anti-aircraft artillery, and flak gun. And they're hopelessly inaccurate. Like they end up shooting down several of their own Zeppelins that are giving chase to to Jason and Amaron. And when they get back down on the ground, Jason kind of remembers, oh yeah, I'm scared of heights, and I didn't even need to be on Amaron's back during that whole thing. So, well, that's what adrenaline does to you, I guess.
Yes.
So they get back into they run back into the tunnel that the Underhaven kids came out of, and they reunite, and they go and a couple.
Harrison, just briefly, on the previous subject, my good friend Sal threw in that his name backwards is Lass. I don't like that so much as a fantasy name, but
Lassie. I can see several jokes from that.
Anyhow, carry on.
Anyhow, so anyway, book 2 ends with all like both groups getting on the ship, the Lofty Gull, and sailing out of the harbor of Empire City. However, it is revealed that not only did Professor Goatman know where Myra was, he also knew where Mrs. Draconis group, because they were really members of the underground resistance movement. But they had been forced to cut ties after Azza's father had been killed in a trip mine, which gave Azza a very large purple scar across the chest. And basically, Jason's over the course of the story, it's several days since Myra and Jason get separated, and Jason's like, "You knew exactly where she was this whole time. You could have led me to her. You didn't." And basically, he socks him in the jaw and nearly shoots him. where the ship captain manages to talk him out of it.
Yes, a wrenching scene.
Yeah.
The Mr. Goatman, that not Myra's mentor, but the other Goatman.
Professor.
Yes. Yeah, he's so many great characters in the second book. In particular, who intrigued me was Mrs. Draconis, who's this like den mother of these like child soldier terrorists, which I really was really interesting to me.
They only kill when they're absolutely forced to. Like they're back up against the wall, they flick out their knives, or they summon their magic and shoot fireballs. Az is the only one actively goes out and tries to kill as many Sulians as possible, because Myra overhears her first night at the sanctuary. She overhears Azza and his mom talking that he was the one who basically set the bomb in the central tower, and he's telling her, he's basically saying, "I wish I had put a little bit more magic in that. Otherwise, the tower would have been completely in half instead of just taking a good chunk out of it."
Right.
Yeah.
And as we've talked about, via DM, I feel like Azza's like his morality makes sense, even as alien as it might be to you or me. Like it makes sense to somebody growing up in that environment. But
he's lived in the tunnel. He's forced to live in the tunnels and sewers his whole life. He goes up to the surface when he absolutely has to. Basically, when I first pictured Azza, I pictured like this half-starved, like bone-thin child eating a raw rat, like behind in a alleyway behind the dumpster.
Doing what you have to do to survive, I would say.
Basically, the reason Professor Goatman didn't tell Jason and Guy and Amaron about that is because he was planning on using Myra and Azza, teaching them how to use their magic, and he was planning to use them as basically weapons of mass destruction. He didn't care about finding Dragon King. Actually, no, he did care, but he's lost sight of it. He said, first, we'll destroy Sulia, then we'll go find the Dragon King, where you're supposed to go find the Dragon King, who himself will right all the world's wrong, basically, in Sulia.
I love that Goatman sees himself as this, like, puppet master, and they all just hate him for it.
Well, Jason would doubtlessly have killed him had the ship's captain not stepped in.
Right.
And also Goatman, I think that Professor Goatman, like you get a sense from the first novel when Mr. Goatman, Myra's tutor, was actually radioing him, like they're using code names Veritatum and what is it? I have the printed up novel here,
which is of course truth in Latin.
Yeah,
the accusative case, at least.
Yes, and basically I tried. Here's the second chapter of the first. Here's the book. Let's see. You mind if I read it out?
No, go ahead.
Okay. Chapter 2, Silent Regrets, page number 43. Mr. Goatman watched as Myra and Jason drove away along. A cloud of light brown dust was kicked up as the vehicle sped away. He watched it become smaller and smaller until he could never see it. The only thing visible, a vast sea of tall emerald green grass. Blades bowed slowly and bent. The sky overhead was light blue. It was a very beautiful and peaceful place to call home. This was the land of the Agrocollectors, meaning the heavenly fields. It was truly a fitting name for such a place, because it was filled with hills, flat plains of grass, and small sprinkled streams of sweet water. Mr. Goatman, however, sadly knew that if his associates and he were correct in their predictions, this happy place would soon be. Mr. Goatman stepped onto a small metal platform, caused him to rise to the highest part of the tower. Located here was a giant brass telescope mounted on a strange-looking apparatus of gears and springs. Mr. Goatman withdrew his gold pocket watch to see if it was nearly time to contact his associate on the shortwave radio. He sat on a chair next to a table with the starter switch. Static growled through the speakers as it came to life. Mr. Goatman picked up the microphone and began to speak. Veritatum, do you read? Over. There was a moment of static. A raspy voice came through. I read you, loud and clear. Please report. Over. Mr. Goatman glanced out of the window in the direction where the pickup had gone. The only trace of it was a thin trail of dust still hanging in the air.
I'm planning a surprise for her birthday, he said. His fingertips turned white as pressed into the receiver. Raspy voice coughed out a laugh. Quite a surprise. Your report? Snapped Mr. Goldman. My subject is under observation. I haven't made contact yet. Raspy voice. Why in blazes no... Warning light beep, beep. Mr. Goldman's radio. With a jerk, he severed the connection. Breathing sharply, he leaned back. After a tense moment, he scraped his chair back and strode to the giant brass telescope. It'll be all right, he thought as he looked at the glass. Rolling hills with the bumper mounds soothed his eye. When he shifted his telescope, his fingers whitened. A black blot filled his vision. It was the high, dark walls of the Sulian Imperial Embassy. As Mr. Goatman watched, a Zeppelin put it into view. His body completely. Not again, he thought. We don't need another one. Myra needs more time, he snapped. I need more time. Mr. Goatman shuddered at what happened if the Sulian Empire became bold enough to attempt another invasion of the Agocalestes. He knew that they would try to take it sooner or later. The Sulian Empire and the people of the Agocalestes had previously come to blows. 3 years ago, there had been a minor border dispute. The Sulians had used it as an excuse to start a bloody war. It lasted several months and ended the Sulians seizing a chunk of the country. A fragile peace was in place, but Mr. Goat knew it would only take a single incident to make the Sulians renew the conflict. Their ambition for total global domination, well, time, Mr. Goldman. Time was never an issue for me. Now everything has to be rushed. What is the world coming to? He shook his head and turned away from the large telescope. He reached into his pockets and withdrew his watch. 11:65 a.m., 6th of March, 1983. Now, it will be long until it all happens. Happen, that is. God help you, Myra. I'm so sorry. If you are indeed the one, I'm so sorry it had to be you. Nice.
That was an appetizing taste.
Yeah, that was the second chapter of one. Yeah, but yeah. So basically,
do you
I hope.
Do you want to give like the elevator pitch of book 3 and then?
Yeah, so basically, book 3 takes place with Myra, Asa, and Mrs. Draconis, and the gang. They have flown off the ship by this point. Basically saying the captain had no idea that Amaron and Twice on the Wolf were board because they were hiding inside a shipping container, and basically said, "Oh, you look. I appreciate you, but I won't. So I can't give you passage with them giant dragons." Basically, Jason's like, okay, I wouldn't sail on the same ship as this professor guy anyway now. So they fly off to the west. Not west. No, east. Sorry, I'm trying to get myself here. They fly off to the east, to the Endless Sand, where they find new and deathless allies. Basically, they're getting all the information out of a self-writing book that Mr. Goatman gave Myra, right, as her birthday present.
Just to be totally clear, the Endless Sands are to the east.
Yes, they are to the east of Sulia.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Yeah.
Yeah, across the Midwater Sea.
That'll be a topic later, but yes, I'm just making sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
So basically, book 3, Myra and Asa, they're reading out of this self-writing book. This is pretty much their guide. Pretty much telling them, all right, where do we go next? Please tell us. Or what am I supposed to do now? And it tells them to go to the Endless Sands to find new and deathless allies. Now, these new and deathless allies are the 9 faithful tribes of Arthuria, who fought alongside the Draco Rex, the Dragon King, when he fell. Now, there were 10 tribes originally, but the 10th tribe, the tribe of Crows, became their leader swapped sides, and the Arthurians are a very honor-bound race. So whatever their leader, their chieftain says, they all have to do. They all have to follow. So, but the 9 faithful tribes, the ones who remain loyal to Draco Rex, they basically sold into slavery to the Endless Sands, to the people who lived there, called the Faradine. But later on in the story, you learn that the Arthurians basically rebelled and they freed themselves. But in doing so, they completely shattered the old Faradine Empire. And now the Endless Sands is nothing more than a collection of small city-states that are constantly against each other, and each claims to be the rightful descendants of the Faradinic Empire.
It's a common enough story in history. You know, after Alexander dies, after Charlemagne dies, that's essentially exactly what happened.
It's not just well, Alexander's generals, they had large, vast swaths of territory. Whereas in the Endless Sands, it's basically if you have control of a well and the people surround it, it's basically everyone who has control of a well and a city that surrounds it, they each claim to, that's basically the extent of their territory, because there's nothing but sand dunes and salt field, rock, as far as the eye can see. There is no rain in the Endless Sands.
Right.
The only sandstorms, and the only water comes from wells. And so basically, long story short, I'm trying to remember how much I can tell you without spoiling it, because you said you're halfway through. So basically, they fly. So Myra and party fly to the Endless Sands, but when they get there, they run into a problem. Now, I can't remember if I gave you the updated version of book 3, because I made some changes. But in the newest version and in the edited version that I've been, they fly into the sandstorm. But as they're flying through the sandstorm, Myra sees these strange figures flying alongside flying wingtip to wingtip, Amaron. But they're just there, like fuzzy outlines. She's not even sure if they're there. And suddenly she looks up, and Amaron's no longer by them. He's gone lost. And then she looks up again, and Twizel's flying towards this giant mountainous sand dune. She doesn't realize she's flying towards it. Long story short, she collides. They all get separated again, and basically Myra and Azza get separated. Jason gets somehow one of these apparitions pulls Jason's ripcord of his parachute that he was given by the underground members because he told them about, like, hey, I survived 1,000 fall. Amaron grabbed him and, like, basically survived. And he's pulled off into the sand, and he hits his head pretty badly. He starts hallucinating about Myra's older sister Lena, his girlfriend, and she's been gone for a year, and he's basically trying to follow this imaginary version of her. And then you follow Myra and Azaphrop desperately trying to basically trying to find their way through this sand dunes, sea of sand, and they come across this dried up oasis. But in this oasis, they find these figures, these see-through figures, who are in fact genie. And this is not the Robin Williams sort of genie. No, this is like the like trickster. Do not believe anything that these people say. Not even people, these spirits say, sort of genies.
Like the actual historical depiction, I feel like, of a genie in, like, Islamic mythology, I guess.
Oh yeah, Islamic and pre-Islamic. Actually, the genies were actually also a pre-Islamic.
Right.
Yeah, and so yeah, basically, they're basically they start taunting Myra when they realize that she's an elf. They start pointy ears. And actually, later when you get to the part of the story, you'll find out that Myra hated being called pointy ears back in the Agriculestes, because she and her family were elves to live in the Agriculestes. So
right,
a big point of bullying, because they start pointy ears. She kind of has like a flashback to these bullying, and she just basically uses her power to strip these jinn of their form. The jinn are invisible, and they can only be seen when they start covering themselves with sand, and it's very difficult for them. So she does it again and again, and the jinn are like, okay, what can we do to make you go away? And she says, water. I want water. And they give them directions to all the water they can drink. However, they neglected to mention that it was the ocean, and water, and thus undrinkable.
I think I made this reference on a comment on one of your videos, but they're like the D&D wish spell. Like, if you wish for like 1,000 gold pieces, like a DM will just like make it drop on top of your head, kind of thing. You know what I mean? Like, there's always like a fine print that you're not thinking about. Like,
well, I've only ever played D&D once with my brother, like 5 years ago, so I'll have to take your word for it.
That's all fair enough. Yeah.
Never finished that campaign.
Yeah.
No. And it was my brother's idea too. So
right.
So anyway, so Myra and Azza walk down the beach, like wetting their faces because they're so dry. They know they can't drink it, but they can't like pull themselves off with it. They kind of trade stories of where Myra grew up. Myra tells Azza about the Everglades and how it's so different to the Empire City, and she asked Azza whether this is what the outside, whether or not this is what the outside world. And is this what you think thought it would be when you got out? It's like, no, but it's a lot better than that place. As they're walking down this beach, they come across a pack of 5 wolves, and basically surround them. They're just basically like inquisitive. They sit around, and Myra and Az are like, okay, we just sit here and stare at these biggest wolves I've ever seen. Not to mention the only wolf I've ever seen. I just put a little joke in there. And all of a sudden they start running off. The wolves run off. The lead wolf kind of looks over his shoulder, like gives them a look like, follow us. Myra and Az do follow them. Another sandstorm hits, and out of the sandstorm they encounter Ryder. And this Ryder is one of the characters that Myra read about the king, the Arthurian chieftain Lingtra, the chieftain of the tribe of wolves. And he accompanied by another group, 40 riders, and they take Myra and Azza to a hovel. And it is there that they find another Arthurian warriors from the tribe of dragons, led by the chieftain Delinda. And inside the hovel, they see Jason they see that the Arthurians have found Jason, and he's suffering from gin dream. Basically, he's basically having a nightmare. Like he finally found Myra's older sister Lena, but she dies in his arms, and all of a sudden these like giant demonic vultures suddenly attack them and eat her alive, and he goes insane, and he wakes up like, I guess a lot of like internet nerds would say like, well, why didn't the Arthurians take his gun off him? But you have to understand, these Arthurians, they're basically, how do I describe it? They are immortal. They are physically immortal, and they don't change that often. Like, basically, they've been living in the rear end of nowhere, so progress is completely stripped them by. The only firearms they've ever encountered, the ones that the Children of the Sand use, like flintlock cabal guns, which have an annoying habit of blowing up in your face, so they know that guns aren't exactly very, very dangerous as far as they're concerned. But then Jason wakes up in his gin dream, pulls out his sidearm and just banging away. Fires 3 shots before he runs out of ammunition, but he ended up shooting Lingtron in the arm, not non-fatally, and not like just like a winged flesh wound, but it was sort of like this interesting introduction first.
Right. The meeting the historical figures who are literally like the exact same people as they were in the history books you read about. That was really interesting to me. That was like if like you or me met like Achilles. He's just like, hey, what's up? I'm Achilles. You're like, what? You know what I mean? It's like, that was a really interesting touch.
Yeah, think of it more like you and I meeting King Arthur, another legendary figure.
Sure.
Yeah. Like we know, like we've heard about them. We think, yeah, they didn't really exist. And then like Jason's like, oh, these guys actually do exist.
Yeah.
Cool. And okay. And basically, he and Lingtra kind of have this discussion. Like Jason profusely apologizes, like, I am so sorry I shot your arm. I am so sorry. I didn't know what I was doing. I was under the influence of the things. Like Lingtra's like, it's all good. It's all good. It's not the first time I've been shot. I didn't actually down in detail, but the first time Lingtra was shot, he was in the shoulder by one of the musket capsules. And if you know anything about ballistics,
Harrison, you with me? Oh, there you are. Okay.
Flintlock musket, the handgun, because musket balls do a lot more damage than 45 caliber.
Yes.
I mean, the speed they go in and how they just nasty, man.
Right.
Yeah. So they're sitting around this hovel waiting for a third company of Arthurians to show up. The third company, the tribe of bears, led by Carla, and they're sitting there and. they see, and as they're sitting there, Myra and Az are going to trying to pass the time by playing tic-tac-toe in the sand, and Jason and Lingtra are basically, they see this black bird off in the distance. Lingtra calls for his bow, and Jason's like, "You're never going to hit it from here. That thing has to be like 400 yards away." And lo and behold, Lingtra gets his black bow, which basically loses his arrow and hits the thing. And Jason's like, "Okay, I'm glad I'm not a betting man. I would have lost." He's like, "That's it." And then the lookouts in this, then they have a lookout standing on top of this hovel that the well is here, and he shouts, "Hey, there's a dust cloud over there. There's a group coming in. Oh crud! It's not our boys. It's a bunch of sand children. There's about 200 of them, and they're all armed, and they're all on horseback, and they're charging toward." So basically, a battle ensues. The Arthurians managed to fight their. See, how many Arthurians were there? There were 40 and about 80 Arthurians to 200 riders from the Sand Children city of Sardun, which is sort of like, these are the best of the best fighters, the most ruthless fighters. And the Arthurians managed to fight them off. And then out of nowhere comes Carla and his riders, along with a giant bear called Urso, which is actually, I think it's Latin.
Yes, it's a different case. It's not the nominative case, but yes, that is Latin for bear.
Well, funny story. I got the name Urso after I was watching some of these DVDs my parents got me a couple years ago for Christmas called the Serial Adventures of Flash Gordon. Like these were these were serials that the movie player would play every weekend, like little 10-minute clip. And there's a scene where one of the characters calls out has a pet bear with Urso, which I thought, oh, okay, I'll use that for a minute.
Sure, yeah, I love it.
Basically, the Sand Children, the Sardunian warriors were hard pressed to fight off Lingtra and Zelinda's band, but the second Carla's band and the bear show up was like, yeah, this is just too much. They just surrender. Most of them surrender. And it is here that this caravan comes in. This caravan, the Sardunian warriors were escorting. They come in. They're full of Arthurian slaves. The Arthurians free their captive brethren, and it turns out that Beatrice, Daniel, and Mrs. Draconis were also captured by these slavers. They are reunited. The Myra, Asa, and company. And then Lingtra, Zelinda, and Carla confront the leader of this caravan. And it turns out that he and Lingtra have history. And Lingtra kills him, shoots him in the back with a bow and arrow, and then scalps him.
And that was quite a scene, by the way.
Yeah, and so basically, the second Lingtra scalps the caravan leader, who's called Masyaf. He scalps Masyaf. Like Jason and the rest, they're kind of looking on horrified, what are you doing that for? But then, when our laws are concerned, he is well within his rights to do it. It's like, okay, and then Lingtra's like, okay, I've got this guy. I've had my revenge against this guy. I've got his scalp. Let's go back to our sanctuary. And they ride through the night to this giant wall of mountains. It's like 1,000 feet high. And it turns out it is this wall of mountains protects a green little country inside within the boundaries of this wall. No one can get inside the sanctuary but by leave of the Arthurians and by secret ways that they know about.
Right.
And I'm trying to remember where you said you were, story-wise. You said you would hit Nightland.
Yes. Yes, exactly.
So have you gotten any further than that?
No.
Okay. So pretty much, the Arthurians take Myra, Asa, and the group and they camp out on top of this wall. And Jason and the Arthurians were basically trading war stories with them. And Jason was telling this one funniest story he remembered from his time as a militiaman. The only Jason desperately hangs on to the funnier moment, the one even the darker humor from that time.
Sure.
He tries to all the dark stuff. And he was basically describing the story about how he and his best friend Drew Wilcox were chained to a Sulian prisoner, and they were ordered to take him back to HQ. However, how it turned out, they were heading towards the Sulian front lines, and the reason they knew that because the Sulians started to outrun them, and they realized when they turned around and started going back the other direction, the Sulians started to basically drag his feet, whine, bitch, and moan. And that's how they knew that they were going the right direction.
Right.
And but then Delinda asks Jason about what happened to your friend Drew, and that's when Jason goes like, "Oh, that's kind of killed him." And then Delinda, Lingtra, Carla were describing. No, wait, I now remember. Then you find out why Lingtra had history with Masyaf and why he killed him the way he did and took his scalp. It was because that's
he was responsible for disabling his wife? Wasn't that true?
Yeah. Well, he was one of a number of people.
Right.
The story that Lingtra's wife, Alea, she and her sisters, or they call them sisters, not really sisters, the handmaidens. They were standing up on top of the wall, and she dropped something. I can't remember which it was. I don't know. Or a handkerchief or something. Anyway, she goes down to retrieve it. She gets jumped by these slavers. They carry her off, and they force her and her handmaidens basically to dance and sing enjoyments of these sand children. And Masyaf was one basically let them sanctuary.
Right.
And one by one, her handmaidens basically dropped out from exhaustion. But finally, Alea couldn't dance, basically barely keep her head up. She collapsed out of exhaustion, and out of rage, "How dare you stop? How dare you stop, slave? Keep going!" It's like, "I can't curse you. I can't." And basically, all right, and they're like, "Okay, if you will not dance for us, you shall never dance or ever again." And they slash her Achilles tendons, both.
Right.
So she can't. And they were about to do a lot of other, they're put out her eyes and a lot of other things left up to imagination when Lingtra and his brother-in-law charge and kill most of the sand children, and got Alea back, but a few of them escaped, and over the years Lingtra has hunted them down and killed them and took their scalps back. Like, Alea, look, I've killed another one. Soon revenge will be ours. And after Masyaf, there was one guy left, who you find out at the end of the book. So here's some more encouragement to continue to the end there. So basically that's the reason Lingtra killed Masyaf the way he did.
Right.
So, they are forced to. Myra and the group are basically forced to sleep out on top of the stone mountains because the gates leading into Sanctuary proper have been locked for the night, and they have to wait until morning before they're unlocked. And while they're sleeping, Myra and Azza have this shared dream in which they encounter the most powerful jinn of his time, Munkar, and he basically tempts them into giving up their quest. Like, why should we? Basically, they're asking, why should we give up our quest to awaken? And Munkar replies, well, it's quite simple. Do you want to see your family again? And also, Azza, do you want your dad to come back from the dead? And they're both sorely tempted, but they both say no. And then Munkar's like, okay, I'm going to kill you right here in this dream. And supposedly, if they die in this dream, they might end up dying in real life.
Right.
But then, before he can attack them, this bright, shining figure appears. Munkar is horrified. He's like, no, I can't, not the light. And basically, this being shouts, away with you, go back to your master, go back to the void from whence you came. Banishes Munkar. and it's and this the Shining Man, as Myron has to say, basically tells them that world of the dream that they are currently in, Nightland, is now theirs. They could do whatever they want with it. They can basically they can change. They can use it to practice their magics, and time moves mostly there. Like an hour in Nightland is like half a second in the real world, the waking world. Right. And then Myron has to wake up and to basically discuss, like, who was that Shining Man? Was he an angel? Like, possibly, maybe, who knows? And they get discussing the deceiver. And
this is about where I am, by the way.
Okay,
yeah, you're hitting about page 215, something like that.
Discussing, like, where did the deceiver come from? And as I was saying, like, well, my dad once told me this story about how the deceiver was actually once the king of the angels, but he wanted power. He wanted to become like his creator. He wanted to become like God, so he rebellion.
And there's your Lucifer influence you mentioned.
Yeah, and basically, long story short, the king of the angels got hopelessly demoted, and he became the father of lies, the deceiver.
Right.
All right, and I think that's where I'll stop with the synopsis, because I don't want to spoil it too much for you. And
well,
also,
I appreciate that.
I don't want to spoil it for any of our viewers. Quick question: How many guys do we have viewing this right now?
Oh, I'm not sure, to be honest. I'm not. I wasn't looking at it, and to be honest, I also kind of don't care. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I know that eventually, like, things grow into things, and like while we're still small like this, it's like, who really cares? You know, it puts it on a different place on your channel, and that's almost kind of why I wanted to do it live. But I wasn't looking, so I honestly don't know. But
yeah, so pretty much that's the plot synopsis thus far. I mean, I wish I could tell you how 3 ends, because I poured my heart and soul into the end of it. So the ending climax took me, I kid you not, a month to get right, and then
I believe
another month to edit it again.
Let's well, if that's the synopsis, I would say that's a good time for a very quick break. I'll use the bathroom, grab a drink, and when we come back, I'll get into my kind of more specific questions for you.
Okay, 5-minute warning, everyone.
That's well, who knows how long it'll be, but I'll hopefully mute myself correctly. And I don't have a intermission screen, so I'll just go back to my intro screen. So anyway, yeah. Hopefully you can't hear my audio when I switch over to it. But
stay tuned, everyone. Back.
All right, we'll be back in a second.
Staring at the sun, you're standing in the sea, your body's over me.
background noise.
Okay, are we back?
I'm back.
Hey, we did it. Well done, my friend. That's just had to. What's that?
Hello.
Hello.
Okay, here.
Okay. All right, we're back. Just had to play a little more copyrighted music for y'all. In any case, yes, excellent summary. As I said, I have no idea how long this is going to go. I have some questions, and this will probably go like just as long on the back half. Who knows? We'll see what happens. You know, that almost entirely depends on you, actually.
Hey, all the comments concerns are more than welcome. In fact, they are encouraged.
Oh, indeed. It's as a writer myself, I know how hard it is to like get honest feedback on your work. Like your family members read it and leave you like a 5-star review on Goodreads. It's like, okay, you obviously didn't like you didn't read it that carefully. You know what I mean? It's like it's not that helpful.
I'm trying to get my brother to actually read it, but he won't touch it because he and I have a bit of a rivalry going on.
Really? He's a writer too, huh?
Oh no, not a writer. It's more like he doesn't really care that much. I mean,
okay.
I don't know how to describe it. Like, I love my brother. Don't get me wrong. He's my only one. But
You are live right now, by the way.
Oh, all right. So, hey, brother, you're watching this. This is how I feel about you. Like, when we were young, when we were little kids, we were the best of friends. But as we got older, our play fighting became a little bit more serious.
That's an interesting conversation for another time, but
yeah, but hey, so I still got a good relationship with him.
That's good. But anyway, as you know, I really, really like these books. Just as far as like starting, you know, kind of the specific stuff. I really like them. There's a lot to love about them. You know, it put me to mind of like, I guess just because it's so popular right now, just like the Song of Ice and Fire books, like Game of Thrones, like you can't help but make that comparison. But like, there's, you know,
less X-rated scenes in it. Like originally, I started writing this thing as like a children's book, but then as I got older and started adding a little bit more like I don't want to say adult themes in it, more like more mature themes.
I would say it's mature, but still like young adult appropriate in a lot of ways.
Yeah, well, I started writing this thing when I was 18 years old, and I'm now 25.
Right.
You know what? Funny thing is, the plot line of this story takes like the story arc of it takes place over the course of 1 year. I've been working on it, as I said, since I was 18, and in universe, the story has barely gone 28 days.
That's quite the time shift there, but
so if I'm going on that, if I'm going by that precedence, this book series will finally be over when I'm 130 years old. Which,
right?
Who knows? Might happen. My both sets of my grandparents, like my grandparents on my dad's side, they both lived into their 90s.
Well, we'll be able to buy new livers and lungs by 2060. So who knows what could happen? But anyway, comparing this to Martin, this almost feels like an antidote to that. Like Martin is just so cynical, and there's just death and awfulness, and everybody sucks, and like the only honorable character like gets his head cut off in the first book. This feels like a swing back towards like a Tolkien vibe to me. Like,
yes.
Like not everything has to be like death and grittiness. You know what I mean? Like,
although that being said, there is a story in the the children of Hurin. Say Hurin. Tolkien names are hard to pronounce.
Indeed.
And, yeah.
It's the old English vibe.
Yeah. You know what? Actually, I mean, I don't really watch Game of Thrones. I watch the battle scenes on YouTube, and I like to know who's alive and who's dead.
Yeah.
But, I never really could get into the show. I mean, I only watched one episode in its entirety when I was in high school.
Sure.
Buddy Mike, shout out to you, Mike, if you ever watched this.
Right.
Off a pirated thing, and also I think I think my brother also has like all of the seasons pirated. Like, let's be honest, everyone pirates that show.
I don't think we're admitting anything terrible on stream here. Most
like the world's worst kept secrets. Like,
yeah,
like it's no secret. It's common knowledge.
Yeah.
Hiding in plain sight.
If you get a frustrating phone call from your government, I apologize in advance.
Hey, I didn't pirate it. My brother did. Anyway, not guilt. Let's not go guilt by association. But,
this is just one more move in your rivalry with your brother, isn't it?
It's a little fun ribbing. Aiden, please don't hurt me afterwards. I'm just playing with you, man. But thanks for the like Tolkien word there. Like if I'm on my if my work ever gets compared, I'd rather it be Tolkien than Martin. I mean,
well, like what's wrong with like honorable characters, you know, and like clear good guys and bad guys. Like it doesn't all have to be this like uber realistic, like we're down in the shit. You know what I mean? Like
death and like death, starvation. Like this is what real war looks like. This is what happens when like every man has the sword at its hand. I think the characters, hearing one of the characters say, Sir Friendzone.
Sir Friendzone.
Isn't that what the guy's hashtag is? Because he can't.
I think so, yeah. But just to follow up just on that point, the world is one of the more interesting I've seen in fantasy because it's a mashup of like tech and magic and like dragons, but it's not like total tech. Like you get this like 1940s vibe from the tech, which is really awesome.
You know, it's one of my pet peeves in I have a whole bunch of pet peeves in like fantasy. Like for example, like have you ever heard / read of the Artemis Fowl series?
I've heard of it, never read it.
Shame. It's a pretty entertaining read. So basically, in the premise of that world, the fairy folk, like the fae, they were real, but then us mudmen, they called us. Well, we just we proliferated out of control, and we pushed them all out their territories, and they were forced to move underground. And they don't. And now fairy technology is super advanced in comparison to human technology, and they don't want to find their tech to exploit them. And other the magical being hidden from the normal one.
Right.
Why the heck is that a thing? I mean, for example, like in the world of Harry Potter, why shouldn't the wizards let all us muggles know, hey, we have magic, we have this power, you don't, therefore we have can control you. And if we're going by the laws of the survival of the fittest, us muggles are basically now peasants to the wizards, although most of the wizards seem fine enough.
Yeah, I mean it's an interesting ethical question. Like does a stronger people have a moral imperative to like see to the needs of a weaker people? I mean, I would say most people today would say yes. Like the disabled who 500 years ago they would have died. They're done. You know, that's sorry you were born with a club foot. Sorry, nice knowing you. But now we're like, no, they still deserve to like have the same quality of life that we have as much as we can make that happen. So it's, but at the same time, it's like if there were like Neanderthals alive today, like, are we like actually morally bound to carry on? Yeah.
I have heard of like cryptozoologists say like apparently there is evidence to suggest that that apparently there was surviving colonies of Neanderthals still alive somewhere in Russia or whatever, but it's doubtful. And also the author, I can't remember his name. Shoot, why am I forgetting his name? The guy who wrote the Jurassic Park books.
Michael Crichton.
Michael Crichton, that's the name. Yeah. He also wrote a book called The 13th Warrior, and it was written from the perspective of an Arab ambassador.
I love that book. I love that book.
Good movie. Basically, the story is that the king of the Danes. So it's basically a retelling of the legend of Beowulf, but instead of the monster Grendel, it is the monsters Wendel, and it's heavily implied that these Wendel are actually like Neanderthals.
Yeah, I remember that about that book, and that shares in common with your own work the occasional footnote, which I thought was a really interesting stylistic choice.
Yeah, well, going back to what my pet peeve about hidden world fantasy, like let's assume that all the legends, all the fairy tales about like magical people and normal humans intermingling in ancient history were in fact true. Now, why have we forgotten that?
Yeah.
What caused this divorce of like magic world and real? Now in my world, people know like dragons and elves exist because elves are basically like humans, but they live slightly more, 200-300 years.
Right.
Where dragons, they look at dragons sort of like the people over in Africa and India would look at an elephant. Like you and I would look at an elephant like, oh, that's massive, that's big.
Sure.
Whereas the people over in those countries where they're naturally occurring would go like, just an elephant. We see them all the time.
Yeah. It almost makes me think of like, I don't know, this may be a weird point, but like when the first people like migrated to North America and they found tons of megafauna, like the woolly mammoths and stuff like that had to be like a similar like, holy shit, look at that thing.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. But there was also megafauna over in Europe, wasn't there? I believe so. I'm actually that the last herds of woolly mammoths died out. We're on a tangent now. The last herds of died out just as the Great Pyramid of Giza Khufu were being built 3,000 years ago. They finally died. They finally kicked the bucket.
I think the theory is that this is a tangent, but I think the theory is that like North America had all their megafauna go extinct because on the Eurasian landmass, like our ability to hunt them evolved in concert with their ability to avoid us. And then once we got to North America, it was like they had never seen humans before, and here come all these awesome hunters, and they just hunted the shit out of everything. And that's why they went extinct. I think that's the theory, but yeah. Yeah,
so basically in my world, people kind of view dragons like, okay, they're highly dangerous, keep your distance, but they're not like the giant rotting monsters of legends. They're sort of like gentle giants. They're gentle giants who can breathe fire and have enough armor plating on them, naturally occurring plating that could rival a Sherman tank. But
this I don't mean this word how it sounds, but there's almost like a mundane quality to them. Like they have like brother and sister arguments, and they're just like people. They're just like people. They're just like giant people who can like breathe fire and like, I don't know.
Yeah,
it's a really interesting treatment of them, I would say.
Yeah. I basically wanted to turn all these kind of like some of these fantasy tropes on their heads, although I do embrace several tropes completely. You
embrace and you have some fun with them. I think there's a moment in book 1 even where like they're like, oh, the princess is captured in a tower. Like, oh, I've never heard that before. It's almost like this like Princess Bride quality to it, where you're like kind of like, yeah, I'm using the trope, and it's like a little aware, kind of thing. Like,
yeah, Myra made that joke. Where have I heard this before?
Yeah. So let's talk about your influences, because I detected certainly some Tolkien, some J.K. Rowling, a little maybe I read in some stuff that you didn't actually use as an influence in your background, but you said you're a Miyazaki fan, and I felt like there was a ton of that there. I thought I saw a little Neverending Story, a little Princess Bride, but like, what are your like major influences as a writer?
Actually, I started writing this book after I had watched the film adaptation and read the novel The Golden Compass.
Love it. Love the movie, love the book.
Yeah. Actually, I read the first book and I watched the novel, but then I found out that at the end of the series, the main character, Lyra, ends up killing God and forming the Republic of Heaven. think
I was unaware of that, but
yeah, that's how I was. That's how that's what I was informed of it. And basically, I found my one buddy, my best friend, told me that people consider the books like call it the anti-Narnia. Narnia sort of like has a lot of Christian allegories in it. So I was like, okay, so this
Philip Pullman is extremely anti-religion. I don't know your politics or religion at all, but Philip Pullman's extremely anti.
Christian Baptist is what I am.
Understood.
And, yeah. So yeah, you can tell I was rather popular. It's secular.
Little put off by Pullman's agenda, if you will.
Well, yeah. Well, I enjoyed the novel. I enjoyed the novel, although there were certain bits where I'm like, that is completely false. That is hopelessly sort of representing my
right.
My brothers. But yeah. So I started writing this thing as like, okay, I'm gonna write a little fan fiction where the character doesn't kill God, she tries to go hate him, and then this whole thing kind of snowballed out of control. Now here I am, 8 years.
That's how it works.
That like almost a decade later, and this world is completely blown up out of proportion. I thought I'd be done when I started writing this thing. I thought I'd be done in 6 months. Bloody hell, fuck, was I wrong?
I know Stephen King describes it as the muse taking a dump on his head.
Yeah, I fully agree with that.
I've also heard Tolkien when he introduced Strider to the story, he had no idea where it was going. He had Strider show up in the inn, and he's like, I don't know who this character is going to turn out to be, and it worked, you know.
Yeah, well, in the third book, there are several characters that I completely intended that to be like just a one-off character, like the Myra and crew have this interaction with this one character, and they never supposed to interact with that characters again. But then I'm like, okay, I'm going to play with this character a little bit, and I kept playing with it, added basically branching off, and then next thing I know, there are now full-blown characters,
right?
With hit, not. And also, like this world, like Tolkien created Middle Earth because he created the Elven languages. Like he felt compelled to have a history for it.
Sure.
Whereas this world, I came up with like there's just basically bare bones outline of the story. Now I felt compelled to create a total history.
Yeah, people have said that about Tolkien, that it was the story was secondary to, because he was a linguist by trade, right? So yeah.
Have you? Question: have you seen the trailers for the Tolkien movie, starring Nicholas Hoult and Lily Collins?
I haven't seen the trailer, but I'm very intrigued by the idea. Yeah,
I'm cautiously optimistic.
Yeah, same.
Just like, do you know the reason why Tolkien why he wrote giant spiders into The Hobbit and Shelob rings?
Because they're objectively evil.
Well, no, it's not just that. He was actually born in South Africa.
Tolkien was.
Yeah, Tolkien was he grew up in South Africa as a little kid, and apparently the story goes one day he was walking down a path and he got bitten by one of the giant tarantulas down there, and that really affected him. I mean, ugh. I am a complete and total arachnophobe. Like if I see a house spider and my fly swatter's the hand, I will destroy it without mercy.
Dude, I gotta tell you, I stepped out of the shower like 3 mornings ago, and I was like rubbing my face off with my towel, and I opened my eyes, and like 6 inches in front of my face, there was this spider like hanging down in front of me.
I had a similar experience a couple years ago at my cottage. My friends and I were riding our bikes up there along this path, and I don't know. Stopped. I think my chain fell off. I slammed on the brakes. I looked up, and there was the biggest spider web I've ever seen in my life. Right in the middle of it was also a giant spider. I'm like, oh, that could have ended very badly.
Dude, like, I'm still scared to go into my bathroom. I'm not gonna lie. This is 3 days ago.
You know what? When back in grade school, my class would go to like the butterfly conservatory. I was in complete and total agony because I take issue with anything that has over 4 limbs. You have too many limbs. You have too many eyes.
Yeah. I don't think you ever answered me. What are your influences as a writer besides Tolkien?
Well, besides Tolkien, I would have to say a lot of real world history, like we haven't gotten to this part of the story yet, but in Arthuria, the continent of Arthuria, where the Arthurians are from, a good portion of the western coast is completely controlled by the Suli. Actually, well, no. First, it was colonized by the Elven coastal empire. Then they got kicked out by the Sulians with the help of the Arthurians and the tribe of Crows. Sort of like, think like up here in Canada. Originally, there was Quebec was a French colony, and they were fighting the English. But then the English got to kick the French out of Quebec and took over. Although that being said, the
French and Indian War, was it?
Yeah, you call it the French and Indian War. We just call it the. I think we just call it the. What do we call it? What
the 7 Years' War?
Yeah, that's it. We call it the 7 Years' War. You call it the French and Indian War.
It was like a couple decades before the American Revolution, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I kind of use that basically the Arthurians saw the elves making colonies on their western coastline. That part of Arthuria was sort of like yeah, well, okay, you guys, we ignore you. Us will engage in some slight fur trade with you, but and also trade you with these like brand new muskets that are lots better at killing things than our longbows. But yeah. Then I don't know. This is all bare bones, by the way. But then something like conflicts started to arise between the elves and the Arthurians. And fun fact, the Arthurians are actually they're actually descended from elves and men. They're sort of like some people in the novels will start calling them mules. Like, get out of my way. Like, you are a mule. You're just basically half breeds. Like the Sulians don't So basically the elves and the Arthurians were fighting like these skirmish wars, these border conflicts, and all of a sudden the Sulians appear out of nowhere, and the Arthurians are like, hey, please help us get rid of these people, these elves. We know you don't like us at all, so help us kick them out. Yeah. So the Sulians helped the Arthurians kick the elves out of Arthuria, but then they immediately took control of all the elven colonies, set up their own government, and basically kicked the Arthurians out of the Westlands. And all the Arthurians who remained inside the Westlands were now forced to become indentured servants or outright slaves to the Sulians.
That's really interesting that you would cite like actual history as one of your major writing influences. Like I think famously George Martin based his whole Song of Ice and Fire off The War of the Roses.
Yeah,
so,
I heard that.
Yeah, that's a very, very valid and interesting influence, I would say.
Yeah, well, also I also tried to. Also, there are several battles during that phase in history. Like these Arthurians, these were the ones who betrayed the Dragon King. So basically, they're sort of like kind of living under a curse. They're kind of like constantly suffering. Like when they aren't starving, when they're not at war, they are having disease breaks out. And when they're not having disease breakouts, they are having wars with the goblin hordes. They are supposedly allied with,
right?
But there's no love lost between them. Even though, if the legends around how the goblin race came to be are true, they are actually relatives. But that's actually, if you want to see how the goblin race came into being in my world, you actually see my lore video that's on my channel. Little shameless plug there.
Don't worry, we'll get the plugs in.
Yeah.
Hashtag subscribe to Harrison.
Thank you. Yeah,
let's talk a little about your writing process. Like, for instance, like I've always been pretty much a morning writer, and I mainly come up with ideas on long walks with music on, and a song will like hit me in a particular way, and like it sort of becomes like the soundtrack to a scene, if that makes sense. And I actually had a former roommate be like, Jesus, like, why are you typing so loud? Because I was like literally just like crushing the keys because I was so like sucked into what I was doing. So I'm sure that's I'm sure you can relate to some of that, but what is your process if you have settled down into one?
I definitely can. But how I get inspired to write my stories? Well, I do that. I listen to music, and actually I try to play out the scene of the story in my head while also listening to music I feel would be appropriate. Let's say if my stories ever became a film franchise, I actually kind of I actually see it in my mind's eye what's going on, and I usually, whenever I write, I like normally I try, like when I was young, when I first started writing this, I'd write from like morning till afternoon. At least I try to, but then as I've gotten older and gotten more distractions, like my PS4, all my
yes,
I found that I've been staying up later and later until practically midnight. I mean, I kid you not. For the last month, I've been staying up until 1 and 2 o'clock in the morning editing.
Editing book 3.
Yeah, that's fun. And also, what else inspires me? Other authors, like certainly J.R.R. Tolkien, definitely big one there.
Sure.
Also, I find listening to audiobooks is kind of better for this because I won't sugarcoat it. I'm very lazy. Listening to audiobooks is a lot quicker than reading the words yourselves.
Indeed.
In my case, doing last night, listening to the audiobook, reading at the same time. And so yeah, I listen to different audiobooks. One of another influence that's kind of seeped into the story, and we'll get into and will be more prevalent much further down the line is the writer H.P. Lovecraft. Have you heard of him?
I'm familiar with this fellow.
He's the guy who created Cthulhu. Tentacle
Indeed.
Face. Yeah. I've listened to several of his stories. Don't get that now. That I won't sugarcoat it. H.P. Lovecraft was quite a racist bastard, but my goodness, could that man write?
This is, I don't know. This is another kind of like, it's another tangent for sure, but it's like judging people by like modern standards. It's like, yeah, he was a horrible person, but like that was like tons of people in that era were really awful people. Like that 50 years, that like
anti-Semitic.
Yes, exactly. That like 1870 to like 1920, there was a lot of really disgusting stuff going around, and a lot of.
Dwight D. Eisenhower was also against like integrating schools down in Europe.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I
think like that institutional racism has been completely stamped out, despite what everyone is saying to the other ones. I mean, no one's openly racist nowadays. Otherwise, they have an angry mob with torches and pitchforks going after them.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So, yeah, I Lovecraft. I don't know. I understand. I understand that the legacy is complicated, but I also don't like. I don't keep with this like judging like people from the past by modern standards, I guess.
Well, I try not to, but you have to admit there are some past individuals that were just out and out monsters.
Like even in their own time. Yeah, absolutely. Like
Genghis Khan, for example. Like he created the biggest empire in world history, but he annihilated like what was it, 10% of the world population back then? And also he sired like 16 million descendants.
I think I've seen like 60% of like Asians are like descended from Genghis Khan.
Actually, there is a portion in Arthurian history where something like that kind of happens. Like it's remembered as the invasion of the savage Eastlanders. Like they just appeared one day out of the Eastern Sea, and they couldn't understand. Like the Arthurians couldn't understand these Eastlanders, and the Eastlanders couldn't, because the language barrier. Like most European languages, like Indo-European languages, there's a slight chance that if you really listen, you can sort of understand.
Sure, absolutely.
Whereas like let's say like Asian or African languages, like there's no hope of us understand them what they're understanding what they're saying, because there's no like sounds completely different.
Those like ancient accounts of when like Rome actually met ancient China are like my favorite historical documents. Where like
I've seen a scene from a movie starring Jackie Chan where apparently that happens, or like a Roman legion encounters like a bunch of Chinese guys.
Starring Jackie Chan. That's awesome.
Well, I only saw the one scene with them fighting, and it's just like, okay, I don't know how to process this.
Yeah, that's awesome. No, but it was totally real. It was like there's some historian out there that thinks that they actually met on the battlefield, which is, in my opinion, extremely unlikely. But there was a Chinese emperor who sent like an envoy to like reach out to Rome, who they called, by the way, Da Qin, which means Greater China, which is like an awesome like Middle Kingdom moment. But they sent this envoy, and he got to Parthia, and he was on like the Persian Gulf, I think, and he was asking these Parthians like, "Yo, how much further is Rome? Like, we want to like, I got to go talk to the Romans. My boss sent me." And the Parthians are like scared that China and Rome will ally. So these Parthian sailors are like, "Oh, it's 1,000,000 miles that way. You don't want to go there. Like you'll probably die in the attempt." When in reality, he's like a couple weeks away from Rome. So these like Parthians just like stymie their attempts to like meet. It's great history.
Yeah. So which part of Rome, which era of Rome was this? Was this Empire Rome or split or Roman Empire?
Early Empire, like 1st century, I would say.
Okay.
I want to say, I mean, Augustus claimed that like Chinese actually came to Rome to talk to him, but who knows if that's true. But
who knows?
Yeah,
it's the history that we shall never know.
Indeed, that's where we bring in the fiction into history, as I mentioned. But
yeah. Speaking of fiction and history, the way I discovered your channel was when you were reviewing AMC's The Terror.
That's yes.
And I pointed out that you said that the character Hickey looked like Jack the Ripper during the party scene out in the ice when the tents catch fire.
Yes.
And I like, hey, sorry, man, you're wrong. Like Jack the Ripper won't be a thing for another 40 years at this point because the show takes place in 1845.
Oh.
8. Was it 1845 or 18?
It was the 1840s that the Franklin expedition happened.
I called you out on that. I felt bad afterwards. Like,
no, man, that's great. I live to be corrected. There's so much like, okay, this is another tangent, but there's so much like bootlicking in professional history, and I'm like, I'm literally one credit away from having a master's degree in history. So like I'm kind of supposedly trying to join these people, but there's just so much like bootlicking, like you're the authority, where like you can't be corrected. It's like, no, if I'm wrong, freaking tell me. You know what I mean? Like that's
okay. Also, we got debating on the Toonback, and I made the suggestion that it wasn't a spirit, that it may have been a surviving megafauna from the Ice Age called a short-faced bear. It certainly looked like a short-faced bear, like the recreations I've seen had. Like the Toonback snout looked very human, like a very short muzzle, but a short-faced bear was also very short because it's the name in the name, short-faced bear.
Right.
There was some evidence to suggest that it hunted like mastodons and other megafauna, which it's certainly fierce enough. But
I'd suspect they probably based the look of the beast on that, but just unless they changed it from Dan Simmons' book.
They did. I think in the novel it's described as it could walk upright like a man, but it has an absurdly long neck. And I thought
also true. Yeah.
And I think I remember commenting on your video like, well, if they put that in the show, it would be like, am I supposed to be terrified or laughing at this?
This like clown giraffe running at you. Oh no.
Yeah, but I now have a new theory about the Toonback. At the beginning, in the first episode, the only one I've actually seen all the way through, the sailor who suddenly dies from I think it was tuberculosis when he starts coughing up blood.
Yes. Episode 1.
Yeah, and he sees something and like he's screaming, "Run, run! It wants us to run!" And you see through his eyes that there is like an Inuit man standing there just looking at him.
Yes.
Well, I think my theory is that is actually the Toonback in its spirit form, basically saying, "Get out of my territory."
Oh, I love it.
And also because I think Lady Silence, the way she described the way when Lady Silence says Toonback, and
Thomas Blanky, your man, the man Thomas Blanky said, it's similar to a word I heard in Russian America, aka Alaska.
Yes.
It's a spirit that wears the skin of an animal. So maybe that was the Tunbach without its skin on.
Oh, I love it. Oh, that's genius.
Yeah.
I'm all for it. I love fan theories, and a lot of fan theories are like, yeah, you're crazy, and you're like Charlie from It's Always Sunny, like pointing at the wall. No, this is real. But yeah, I actually kind of buy that one. That's interesting.
Yeah. So going back on to what we were saying, like how about history. Like I try to transplant real world history into the Draco Rex storylines. Like there is I tried to transplant 2 military disasters into this story. Like the first, like during that episode I told you about, where the Arthurians of the tribe of Crows were fighting both the Sulians and the Elves. In the first battle, when they were fighting the Elves, they had like a battle of Isandawana sort of thing. Do you know what the Battle of Isandawana was? I
am not familiar. What?
Oh, here's a treat for you. Okay, so basically I think it was 1880. I'm not sure. It was late 19th century. The Brits were basically moving in to Natal in South Africa because they had found out that there were diamonds there. However, the Zulu Empire was also there, and the Brits were basically the British governor there, independent of England, I should say. He basically gave the Zulu king Kachwaya a ultimatum: stand down your armies and basically let us move in, or we will consider you a hostile force. Kachwayo got this report. It's like, who are you guys to give me orders in my own country? Basically, I gave him the equivalent of flipping the bird. So the Brits, having an excuse to go into Zululand to annihilate the Zulu army with their superior fighting forces, marched in. However, the commanding officer of the British army, I can't remember his name, made a fatal error. It made a fatal assumption. He believed that the Zulu army would not fight, that they would run and fight a guerrilla campaign. So what he did was he split his force into 2. 1,500 men stayed at this one area, stayed at Isandawana, while he took the main force and attempted to go and catch Kachwaya's army. And this force of 1,500 men ended up finding the entire Zulu army by accident, 3,000 Zulu warriors, and they were annihilated to a man. In spite of the fact that they had not only artillery, they had rockets, they had cavalry, and I think, I'm not sure, don't quote me on this, but I think they may have had a few Gatling guns, like hand crank Gatling guns, not like those things you see on A-10 Warthogs.
Right.
But like the ones you see at the end of The Last Samurai, those kind of machine guns.
Sure.
I think they might have had them. They might not. But basically, the Zulus just basically bum rushed them and annihilated them. And it is still the worst defeat by a modern army by a technologically inferior fighting force.
Yeah, it's very reminiscent of like, I don't know how much American history you know, but like Custer at Little Bighorn. That's kind of what I was thinking of when you described it.
I wouldn't say Little Bighorn was there like technically inferior because the natives and your cavalry were both packing the same type of weapons.
Yeah, fair point. Fair.
Yeah. Whereas the Zulu warriors only had something called an agazi, I think it's called. It's basically a short spear and a cowhide shield. Now, in my world, something very similar happened called the Battle of Iron Peak, where an Arthurian army of 10,000 took on an Elven army of around 20,000 and armed with like muskets and bayonets. And the Arthurians only had like Viking era weapons like mail halberds, helmets, swords, shields, Dane axes, longbows, and they annihilated them. And several hundred years after that, after the Arthurians kicked the Elves out, and the Arthurians were themselves kicked out of the Westlands by the Sulians invaded "quote unquote" wild Arthuria. Actually, I think I gave you a couple of maps on Facebook Messenger and of the Westlands, and you can see right on the very far right hand side where it's labeled Wild Arthuria and Ghost Pass.
Right.
And in that situation, I based that off of like the lost Legion of Rome. the one that went beyond Hadrian's Wall.
Yes.
And was never seen or heard from again.
Oh, I thought you were going the Battle of the Teutoburg, where Augustus sent his men up there, and the Arminius, the former Roman, you just annihilated them, and you get Augustus banging on the wall, "Give me back my legions."
Yeah, no, but I think basically in that situation, several hundred years have passed, and basically the Sulians are not armed with flintlock muskets anymore. They now have like Gewehr, old action rifles. Although a vast majority of their levy troops still have like cap and ball muskets, sort of like what Civil War reenactors use.
Sure, yeah.
But they had 76,000 men with like wagons and a couple of bulldozers to push down to make roads through the forest. They had like howitzers and like siege howitzers and like black powder artillery pieces. And they went up against a force of like 90,000 Arthurian horsemen, and only one Sulian survived. So, granted, the Sulians had been led on a chase, and their wagon train had been completely burned, and disease had cut out. And by the time the actual battle took place, there was only 30,000 of them standing. But oh well.
So, since we're on the subject, let's actually talk about the world itself, which, as I've already mentioned, is this like really cool mixture of like kinda tech and magic, but like everything makes sense too. Like the people who don't have magic like went like a tech route, and that seems to become the Sulians. And there's like moderate magic mixed into the tech stuff, but like for the most part, it feels like it's pretty separate. Like there's like magic and versus tech, and like when, for instance, like when Jason shows up in the pickup truck in book 1, I was like, wait. What? we're in the modern world all of a sudden, and like I mentioned, like there's the dragon, sneaking on the train car, and in book 3 we get, of course, like the wonderful like long gun versus bow contest. But anyway, like what was the genesis of this for you? Like what kind of?
Well, I look at it like this way. Every fantasy story I've ever read, bar Artemis Fowl, was always set in a fantasy medieval world. And I thought to myself, why are these people technologically stagnant all the time?
Yeah.
And I guess like in those situations, like people have magic. Like why would you need to invent rifles or guns or electricity when you have magic to do all that stuff? But after Draco Rex fell, the magical world kind of diminished. They called it the old world. The old world diminished, and the new one took place. It took a long time for it to actually get to the level of technology that you are currently reading about, but it got there. And actually, now that technology is around and available, it's basically you are now basically a man with if a magical person, which actually in my book they're called magi. If a magi and a non-magi got into a fight, they would be on equal grounds if the magi had his magical powers and the other guy had a gun, basically. So in this world, I always, when I was writing this thing, I was like, okay, why is there no such thing as technological advancement? So I just did it. I'm like, okay, this world has had its industrial revolution. It's had its discovery of electricity. It's had its like discovery of steam power and like gasoline and whatnot.
I want to say, like when China met Europe in like the Age of Exploration, right? I want to say that there's one theory that says that China was caught in like a quote unquote like high productivity equilibrium trap, where like their like livelihood and their quality of life was like good enough that they didn't have a ton of reason to like keep like going on with industrial advancements. And like that's extremely oversimplified, but I feel like it's almost kind of a similar thing. Like the magic folks didn't need to technologize because they had magic to help their lives. But these people who don't have magic, hey, we got to do something. Like we're tired of starving, kind of thing.
Well, no, it's not like that. It's more like the people with magic. They were normally the ones who would
would have power, or they would be the ones advising the guys to have power.
Right.
Like actually, there's a section. I think there's a section. There's a history. There's an age in my world called the Storm Age, and actually, I believe you liked the video describing how the age of the Storm Lords came to be on my Facebook.
Yeah.
Basically, for a long time, the world was basically ruled over by these super uber wizards who could actually control like thunderstorms. Like they could summon a tempest from out of a clear sky. They were really powerful. Even the least powerful amongst them could like shoot lightning bolts out of their hands. And they were actually the only people crazy enough and skilled enough to take on dragons and win. Because, I once saw a depiction of Saint George and the Dragon. Like, there was Saint George on his horse in armor with his lance. But the artist decided that the dragon was going to be like the size of Smaug, like just giants. And I thought to myself, there is no way that this is going to end well for that poor guy. So basically now that there's actually technology, like no magical people actually have a chance against a dragon because they're packing like heavy artillery, and even then it's still a close match.
Right.
Yeah. And,
just to talk about style, like we touched on it briefly, but I mentioned Michael Crichton, and I feel like Tolkien's clearly, like, I don't want to say clearly, but seems to be your primary influence. But do you have any particular stylistic influences, and if so, who? Just as far as like actually putting the words on the page.
You mean like how do I came up with like my sentence structure and all that?
Yeah, I mean, like, do you have someone like mine, for instance, is Cormac McCarthy. If I had to pick one author who I most kind of like, wow, that's a really that really like hits me. That'd be Cormac McCarthy. Like, who's the one who you most like want to sound like, if there is one?
I honestly don't know. I mean, I just write it the way I do because I think it sounds good.
Sure.
And that's the way I have it in my head. But I think maybe Tolkien
right.
would probably be the big one there, and also listening to like the old like the Norse sagas, like the way they're written down. And
especially a lot of your history, I feel like really like it emulates that style extremely well.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I don't really know. I just basically I might cherry pick a couple of styles. Like, it all depends on what audiobook I had just listened to right before I start writing.
Yes,
who knows? I don't know. I guess my style is it's just a Frankenstein's monster of all these other different styles that I've come across.
Sure.
And
yeah, it's a weird thing. It's like we're not necessarily like aping or copying, but like we all stand on the shoulders of giants. Like we all want to write this stuff because something touched us. When, you know what I mean? Like something like fired us up inside, and you're like, wow, I really want to create something because that inspired me. Yeah. But
and let's see. And going back to the world I created, and I'm kind of just the way I kind of came up with the Arthurians, how they remained at the level of technology that they were for the 12,000 years that they were in exile in the sands. One reason was because they're staunchly traditionalist, staunchly conservative people. They don't change that often, and also it's just geographic isolation. They're dead center in the middle of the biggest deserts known in this world, and the people around them also don't have much contact of the outside world. The only contact the Children of the Sands have really is with the Sulian Empire, because the Sulian Empire has the numerous governments of the Endless Sands as protectorates, because there's oil under those sands, and they desperately need that oil for their empire.
And that's what you're talking about is depicted well in the character of Zelinda, I believe, who when he sees like a gun, which is like
a modern gun.
Yeah, which is an objectively better weapon than his sword. I can kill you from 1,000 yards away instead of having to be right next to you. Like, that's objectively better. He's still like, no, like, my father bequeathed me this sword. I'm not gonna like change to your like weirdo like magic boomstick or whatever. You know, that conservatism you're talking about is depicted very well, I feel like.
Well, they're not that conservative. I mean, they're not the Arthurians. They may be stubborn when it comes to their traditions, but they're by no means they're not idiots. Like, for example, during like the early days of their history, they were running around with like bronze and whatnot. But then one day they encountered this warrior who was armed and armored with iron tools, and they're like, well, bronze was good while it lasted. Let's grab this iron stuff.
Yeah.
Let's start using this iron, and then let's start using this steel because we found out we can actually make steel occasionally.
And that was, of course, like a couple 100-year process, but yeah.
Yeah. I mean, like, look at it this way: like a caveman using a stone tool will drop that immediately the second he sees a metal tool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
He'll still use that stone tool if there's nothing else available. But hey, if something is more efficient and gets the job done quicker, he's going to use it.
But, like, in the moment, of course, like, we're talking about, like, the Bronze Age to the Iron Age. Like, that's, like, a long transition. Like, hunter-gatherer to agricultural society, that's a long transition. But in the moment, I'm sure there's always people like Zelinda who are just like, no, I'm going to do it like my father did. You know?
Yeah.
Yeah,
but then Jason says to Zelinda, oh, well, I can tell, I know sooner or later you're going to eat those words because I can see you're not a fool. And basically, I think what really set Zelinda off on the guns was during the testing when he was. Have you gotten to the bit where Jason and the Arthurians go out and they did the target practicing? Did you get to the scene immediately after that?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
When they go out beyond the sands, go out beyond on the walls and the.
Yes.
That bit?
Yes. Yeah.
When they actually capture a bunch of Sulian trucks.
Yes.
Filled
Yeah.
with Sulian guns, and basically, I think Zelinda was more or less horrified by what the guns were actually doing to these pigs they'd set up as a target, and these pigs were all decked out in like gambeson and chainmail, which, like, if you know anything about medieval, or that's like gambeson and chainmail, that's very good. It's good, if not some cases better than using plate armor. And these bullets were just like ripping through it like it was just basically hot knife through butter. And also the wounds that these pig targets were sustaining was like, oh, these things are horrible. Like that little like 5-inch long brass casing and lead tip thing did all that.
Yeah.
I mean, it takes me a few swings with my sword to get through the neck of a hobgoblin occasionally.
This tiny piece of metal did all that damage.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like, basically, I think one of the characters in the story, Dora, who's also quite conservative. One of the conservative Arthurians was basically saying like, "Oh God in heaven, why have you allowed your human children to create these things? Was the sword not good enough for you people?"
That's right. Yes.
Yeah, no, it wasn't good enough. I mean, we'll still stick a bayonet at the end of a rifle, but choice of shooting the guy before he gets anywhere near you, I'll take it.
If there's one thing we're good at as a species, it's newer and improved ways to kill each other.
Yeah, that's one of our undesirable traits.
Indeed.
Yeah, and that ain't leaving anytime soon.
On that note, I want to talk a little. Let me find my exact note. I want to talk a little about the Sulians and Empire City in Book 2. You know, it's an extremely evocative look at like a decaying empire. Like you get the sense that literally all they do well now is like military might.
Yeah,
like,
well, basically that's what the Sulians are. They're not like they have territory. They are an empire. But the Sulian, what was it? I remember hearing sometime like about Prussia in the 1880s. Like I think someone said like in Europe, states have armies, but in Prussia, the army has a state.
Yeah, exactly. Like that's all they're good at is like the military. And I don't know if this was your intention. You know, you mentioned the Prussia influence, but that certainly feels a lot like the modern United States and a lot like Rome towards the end, and this whole, you know...
Not the states. I wouldn't say I wasn't influenced. The Sicilians weren't influenced by the states. No, that would be the United Allied Conglomeration, the UAC. More like back in the 1920s, with like the League of Nations and that debacle. No,
yeah, fair enough.
I based the Sicilians off of Nazi Germany and to a lesser extent the Roman Empire.
But all the same, it's a very interesting depiction of how, like, I don't know, people say, like, how can this happen? Like, how was, like, Hitler democratically elected initially? And it's like, no, people can actually make, like, really terrible democratic decisions, you know? And this whole, like, the concept of, like, the split city that you depicted, where, like, everybody on the ground is just, like, living in filth, and then there's, like, the tops of the skyscrapers where everybody's, like, living on the high horse.
Partying it up, yeah.
Yeah, it put me to mind of my own country in certain ways, but...
I didn't catch that, say again?
Oh, it put me to mind of my own country in certain ways. Just the whole extreme income disparity, I guess.
Well, in any country, I would say that's a truth to a certain extent, I'd say. Like, there's always a gap. Oh, there's always a gap after all between the haves and have-nots. Sometimes that gap is 10 miles wide. Sometimes that gap is only about 2 inches. Who knows?
Sure.
Yeah.
But
anyway, my symbolism there wasn't exactly very subtle, was it?
I mean, it was, you know, sometimes the symbolism can be delivered with a sledgehammer. That's okay.
Yeah, why you use a scalpel when you can use a hammer?
Indeed. So just a moment on, like, the protagonists, who are uniformly very young. You know, as we've discussed, Jason's essentially, you know, he's almost like, well, he is a father figure, but he's literally 18 years old. But
well, I'd say he's more like a brother figure because, as I said earlier during the synopsis, he's known Myra her entire life. He met her when she was basically like a few weeks old. Like, her family was like fresh off the boat. He was 6 years old.
And there's a 6-year age difference between them.
Yeah. He views himself, and Myra views him as her older brother, sort of like that situation. And also, Jason kind of feels the same way about his two cousins, Beatrice and Daniel, because they lived in the same house together. They're more like brothers and sister in that case.
Sure, but I guess legally he's a father figure, right? He's like the legal guardian. Is that?
Yeah, he was once Myra's family disappeared and it was discovered and they couldn't find them. They basically opened up Myra's father's will, and that's when Jason found out that he'd been saddled with Myra and that he was so he's
right.
been living.
I guess my main point is that the kids in the story actually behave like kids. Like in the third book, they're stealing pastries. Like Myra's kind of a whiny butthead sometimes, and like whines about where she has to sleep. You know, like I guess often kids in fiction don't actually act like children, right? Like
small adults.
Yeah, exactly. Like the classic example to my mind is like Calvin and Hobbes, which I love, but it's like.
That's more like a comic strip, isn't it? It's more like it's written just for laughs. Whereas a good example of a child character written more like an adult would be Artemis Fowl, because, well, in that story, they say he's got like super genius level intellect. That's why he.
Okay.
That's why.
Or there's like. I only bring up Calvin and Hobbes because it's the most like extreme example I can think of. But
yeah,
but yeah, there's definitely tons of like on the spectrum, I guess, of kids talking like adults. There's like Charles Wallace in A Wrinkle in Time, where often enough they don't actually act like kids, but your kids in this story actually talk and act like kids. Like you could argue that Harry Potter doesn't really act like a kid, but I don't know. What are your thoughts on like writing child characters?
I'm gonna meet you for 5 seconds. Someone's calling me. I'll be right back.
Oh, go ahead. So we'll take a quick break as Harrison takes a phone call. I don't know what I should do. what I should do right now. Maybe I'll just go to the intermission screen. I believe we're back.
And hello once again. I'm sorry about that little miss there. Had to do something in IRL.
Life happens.
Life happens. Yeah. So
writing kids.
Yes, we were writing about kids, and you said that you really enjoyed that I didn't write the characters Myra as and Daniel as like little adults in children's bodies.
Exactly. They actually talk like kids, which I really appreciated.
What did you think of the Arthurian kids? The ones that they ran across, the ones that are like over 1,000 years old but still in children's bodies.
Again, you're predicting my future content, but
I'm sorry.
It's fine. They definitely talked different, and the whole idea of an immortal race, like even being like interested or engaging with a mortal race, is kind of interesting too. Like I've always thought that about Tolkien. Like, why do the elves even care about humans? You know what I mean? It's like based on their like mental time scale, like the humans will be gone, like that. Like humans are a fruit fly as far as they're concerned. But the Arthurian kids were distinct, I would say.
Yeah. Well, I tried to write when the character Daniel was talking with his new band of Arthurian his new band of friends.
Right.
Like when he found out that his new friend Cress was like 1,300 years old, it's kind of like, wait, what?
Yeah.
No, you are not that old. You look like you're at my age. But then he's like, well, no. Oh, I'm basically an infant compared to these guys.
Yeah.
Yes, but the Arthurians, they're not like one of those immortal race. They're not the immortal in the sense of like, oh, we're the high, mighty, snooty kind of thing, like with looking down their noses at everyone. No, they know they're just as fallible as everyone else, and basically, they view themselves, they view their like immortal lives. They view us, they view themselves as the same as us, only they live longer. They live much longer.
Sure.
Yeah, and actually, that being said, like the Arthurians can and do die occasionally. Like they can't be killed in combat unless I guess you take their head clean off, or but they can die of like disease and broken hearts and
sure,
shame, I guess, in certain areas.
What was. I mean, you were essentially almost a child yourself when you conceived of these characters, but I mean, was that like did you consciously make a separation between the children and adult characters in this story? Like, was there like
No, I just the way I wrote it was because I thought, okay, how are they going to do this? How would they react logically to this situation?
Right.
I guess I try to put myself in their shoes. Like if I was a 12-year-old child and I was faced with it with like scenario X, how would I respond to it as a child?
Sure.
Or how would Jason respond into scenario X? Because I tried to base Jason off the ideal version of myself. Like I described him as looking basically like me when I was 18.
I certainly noticed the physical description comparison.
Yeah, but Jason, when I don't know if you when during the climax of the second book, and Jason's basically Jason's like going no nonsense, like thinking a mile a minute, trying to figure out how to get himself or guys out of that situation without getting them killed. Since he fought in the Agro-Sulian War, he knows how to handle himself and also how to handle a situation like that.
Yeah, for sure.
Mm-hmm. And also, actually going back to Jason, he's very, very bloodthirsty when it comes to like killing Sulians, because as far as he's concerned, like I haven't written this down yet, but there's a situation where he comes across a Sulian and they're having this long debate. Not the Sulian he ran across when he and Lingtra and the Arthurians were stealing the guns, and like basically the Sulian was saying, we are the master race. We know that it is so because we say it is so. We say it is so because we know it is so. Basically, the Sulians are basically in an echo chamber, and the Sulian said to Jason, after Jason pistol whipped the Sulian a couple of times, he said something like, I can see why your race was slated for conquest. You are overly violent. You need the Sulian Empire to cool your bloodlust. And Jason really doubles over laughing.
Right.
You're one to talk, you self-righteous. And then when the Sulians give him more lip, he just shoves a gun in his face and he says, hey, look, if there was ever a race slated for conquest, it was yours. Basically, Jason thinks the only good Suli's a dead one.
Right. Then there's some interesting questions there, but we'll get there. But
you have to understand that he saw the entire world as he knew it basically burned to death over the course of 7 months. All of his boyhood friends are gone.
No, of course, it makes complete sense from the character's point of view. Yeah, absolutely.
He doesn't just hate Suli. He hates what they turned him into.
Right.
There was a big turning point during which I won't spoil, but it basically something inside Jason died, and every night he would slip across like no man's land.
Right.
Creep into the Sulian trench line and just basically butcher any Sulian across without mercy, and then get across and slip back across the no man's land into his trench line. And actually, he refuses to admit this, but when the war came to an end, he was almost sad that it ended
because he has to stop killing them.
Yeah, basically, he didn't want to stop until they were all dead.
Right. So I guess one thing that I really appreciate and enjoy about these books is that you're not afraid to like slow down the tension for like a legitimately like beautiful moment. You know what I mean? It's like there's like, I feel like short attention spans anymore are like lauded and applauded, and like people are like weirdly almost proud to say they can't focus on something for more than 10 seconds. But in these books, like you're totally willing to slow down and throw in like a song, or when there's like in book 3, one character's walking, avoiding spoilers, one character's walking another down this mosaic of her people's history and just describing it. And you'll totally just, it feels very like Japanese, like Miyazaki to me. And I really appreciate it. I guess this isn't a question so much as just a comment, but I really like that about it.
So you really liked that scene, did you?
I did, yeah. It was great. Yeah. Well,
I had to figure out a way as to how to describe where the Arthurians came from, and that seemed like the best way to describe it. Like, I guess for the Arthurians, they have an oral history, but they also have they also write stuff down, but not just with paper, but they also write it down in stone. Because
right.
One of my sorry, just one of my water bottles I'm suddenly just gonna collapse there on itself.
I don't have your cam up. I'm looking at my own cam in my notes. Sorry.
Never mind. It's coming. Anyway, so so you were talking about Empire City earlier. What did you think of the way I described it? Like from Myra's perspective, like it's just like a dead city.
It felt very. Have you ever read A Wrinkle in Time?
I have not read The Wrinkle of Time, but I did watch the 1990s adaptation that was made.
Okay, I think that was like a kind of shabby like TV movie essentially.
Yeah, I haven't seen the one with Chris Pine yet.
Yeah, the just.
I've heard that they kind of gutted the story.
I didn't hate it. It's one of my favorite books, but the description of the city felt very. It felt like something that Madeleine L'Engle would have written. Just the sort of oppressive, sort of like just a shitty place, like just an absolute like.
Yeah, well, basically, it was sort of like a manifestation of like the Sulians generate evil. Like they consider themselves to be like the master race. They're the Nazis, but yet their
own like home city is just a disaster. Like
but actually, I don't know if you remember that, but in this story, the Professor Goatman says that they didn't actually build Empire City; they conquered it from the people who actually built it.
Oh, right.
And actually, he said this city is not the first to bear the shameful title of Empire City. There have been others, and there will be more to come. Because basically, once this current Empire City is basically ground to dust, they're going to be looking around like, okay, what city that other people are building will be our new capital? Basically,
so they're essentially parasitic, you might say.
Yeah, well, Professor Goldman describes them as the perfect parasite.
Right.
They just destroy and they conquer, and that's why they have to have such a vast slave population, because they can't do it themselves. Like the Elven colonies in the Westland area, they didn't build any of those cities. They just basically took them over.
Sure.
The only things they added to them was railroads, and their slightly more modern infrastructure, like. Arthuria to the Sulian Empire was India to the British Empire. It's the jewel in the crown, so to speak.
You know what kind of interests me about just the name Empire City? Like, as we say, like internet dorks might just be like, "Oh, that's what a name, Empire City." But like, if you actually translate most things to their original language, they're like, the name of a city will be like between the rivers. You know what I mean? It's like or coastal capital or something like that. Like Chinese is famous for this. Like I think the actual word for the word for airplane in Chinese is like car air or something. It's not that, but it's something like that.
Yeah. Well, I guess that reason also applies to your city. You said you were correct.
I lost you for a second. One more time.
I said that logic of name breakdown would also apply to your home city. You said you were Portland?
Portland, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So Portland.
It's right there in the name.
Yeah. Although I wonder what I don't think that would apply to my hometown, even though there is a river. But my hometown is called Hespler. I'm not sure how you would break that down.
I'd have to look at the etymology, but I bet it's something super simple like that. I would not be at all surprised.
Yeah, we were I think the name was named after the first. It was either the first or the richest settler in this region. Anyway, yeah. So, what did you think of all right, quick serious question now. What's your favorite scene from each book? From each of the stories?
Oh boy.
Making you think now. I mean, I think the one that I think the one that I think the one that I think the most about is the Empire City. Because basically, once this current Empire City is ground to dust, they're going to be looking around like, okay, what city that other people are building will be our new capital?
I mean, there's so many like evocative like landscapes and locations. It was like, I guess, I don't know. It'd be hard to pick like a favorite scene for like the emotional content, if that makes sense. But like,
Take your time, man. Take your time.
I don't know. It's, what I love about them is that each book is so distinct too. Like,
well,
like
yes.
I think about the first one, and it just feels so like you feel like you're in the Agrocaelestis. You feel like the blowing grass and just this flat land. And the second one, like you think about it, and you're in this like oppressive, like dark, repulsive city. And the third one feels so like you're out in the desert. I don't know.
You hit this, and then you're in like nice green pasture lands again.
Right. Yeah. I don't know. It's. I'll get back to you on that. But in any case, we're above 2.5 hours. I'd suggest that this is a good start, and we'll certainly do another of these.
Yeah, you said that you hadn't finished book 3, so when you finish it, we will do this stream again.
I think so. I think we'll swing back around and we'll give a complete sort of a reckoning, I suppose. But
okay.
Yeah, I suppose just for the sake of any current or future viewers, maybe we ought to cut this thing.
Okay. Quick question. These streams, do they save to the to your YouTube thing? Because I remember when you did your first stream with Fortnite, and that video was on there for a while, but then one day it just disappeared.
I think so.
Okay.
It should save. If I have my ducks in a row, it should save, and we won't have to worry about that.
Well, I look to rewatching these things.
Indeed.
Also, I have to send this link to my aunt, who's also reading the books, and she's been kind of hassling me to give her 3. I forgot give it to her. So.
Oh yeah. It's I hassled you for a couple of weeks, I think, to send them to me, and I'm very happy you did, because I'm enjoying them greatly.
Yeah, well, now I have to start writing book 4, like literally tomorrow or this afternoon.
You should get to work, young man.
Yeah, although I do suffer from what is called blank page syndrome. Like, I'm just staring there, like, I start this.
Oh, just stare at the screen until your forehead bleeds.
I've done that. Granted, I tripped, but that doesn't reflect the
All right, 2.5 hours. I feel like that's a good start. I'm gonna go ahead and kill this thing, and we'll certainly pick this up soon. And it's again, love the world, really enjoying the books, and I'm looking forward to continuing them. So
do I. Well, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, dogs, although cats and dogs are watching this, I'm both surprised and impressed. This has been world-renowned historian and Harrison McArthur Draco Pendragon signing off.
You give your real name and your fake YouTube name. Should I do the same? My name's Kevin, everybody. I'm the world-renowned historian. That's my boy Draco, Harrison McArthur.
Harrison McArthur Draco Pendragon, and Kevin, the world-renowned historian, signing off.
All right.